win.
Right. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and everybody in between. I would like to welcome members, officers, and members of the public to this meeting of the Council. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to update you on the systems being used and confirm that officers in remote attendances are present. Do we have any officers?
Can I confirm the following officers joining remotely can hear us and that we can hear them? Joe Dufficy.
Present. Good evening.
Good evening. Geraldine Goodwin.
Yeah, present. Good evening.
Good evening. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. The normal procedure rules in respect of debate and times to speak will apply. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? I will now hand back to the chair.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. I've received apologies for absence from councillors Chris Hinchliffe, Daniel Wright-Mason, Ewan Cowell, Sean Nolan, Terry Tyler, Raj Bakker, and Councillor Faye Frost. Are there any further apologies? Councillor Bloxham.
I think we have Councillor Weeks.
Thank you very much. Notification of other business. There has been no other business advised. Chair's announcements. Audio recording. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is recorded. The recordings will be available on both the council's YouTube page as well as the council's ModGov site. Climate emergency and ecological emergency. Members are reminded this council has declared both a climate emergency and an ecological emergency. These are serious decisions and mean that, as these are emergencies, all of us officers and members have that in mind as we carry out our various roles and tasks. More details are included on the agenda front sheet. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. Rules of debate. Please can I remind you the normal procedural rules in respect of debate and times to speak will apply. No speeches may be made after the mover has moved a motion and explained the purpose of it until that motion has been seconded. When seconding a motion or amendment, a member may reserve their speech until later in the debate. In accordance with the Constitution, please can members ensure that no speech exceeds 5 minutes without the consent of the chair. For clarification, I have received a request from Councillor Munzer to exceed 5 minutes in relation to the notice of motion, and for Councillor Ian Albert to exceed 5 minutes in relation to the budget item, and from Councillor Hone to respond with his pre-sent questions. Whilst on this matter of procedure, please could I respectfully remind you that the title is Chair of Council, not Chairman, and to therefore refer to me as such. Thank you. Comfort break. For the purpose of clarification, 4.8.23a of the Constitution does not apply to this meeting. Therefore, a member may leave the room during the debate and consideration of that item and still be able to vote. However, please be mindful of the business on the agenda and wherever possible, leave at an appropriate point in the proceedings. I will take a comfort break at an appropriate time in the meeting, should proceedings continue at length. Voter ID. You will note that there are some A5 flyers and A4 posters in front of you regarding photo ID being required in polling stations in May. We'd really appreciate your help to promote this by displaying them in any community buildings or notice boards that you may have access to and on social medias. Obviously, please obtain permission first and no fly postering. Candidates and agent briefings. A reminder that briefings for prospective candidates and agents are being held virtually on Wednesday, the 6th of March and Monday, the 11th of March, both at 7 p.m. The briefings will provide essential information, including changes imposed through the Elections Act. Therefore, you are strongly encouraged to attend. Please contact the Electoral Services team to register and spread the word to anyone you know who may not be here that may wish to attend. Expenses. As we near the end of the financial year, please ensure that any travel and subsistence claims for the 3 months period of January to March are submitted and approved by the end of April. Chair's Civic Events and North Herts Heroes Awards is taking place tomorrow. Thank you. It will be at Hitchin Town Hall, and I look forward to welcoming those of you who have purchased tickets. The event is raising money for my chosen charities, Feed Up, Warm Up and Resolve. Changes to the agenda. I have agreed to a change in order of the published agenda, and item 9 will now take place following item 7. Public participation. We have no public participation at this meeting. There have been no questions submitted in accordance with Standing Order 4.8.11 from members. Notice of motions. We have received one motion to consider, due notice of which has been given in accordance with Standing Order 4.8.12. A 4-day week. Subsequent to the agenda publication, there have been 2 amended motions published as a supplementary document regarding the motion proposed by Councillor Muncer. Please ensure that you refer to the most recently published version, annotated with "as amended with today's date." In addition, there have been amendments to the motion proposed by Councillor Matt Barnes and seconded by Councillor Dominic Griffiths, which have also been published as a supplementary document. Councillor Muncer, can I invite you to move the motion?
Thank you, Chair. £45 billion. That is the cost to the British taxpayer of implementing a 4-day working week across the public sector. Now, there is a desire within local government to move towards implementing a 4-day working week. In South Cambridgeshire, just across the border, that desire is now a reality, where officers and staff are working a 4-day week. They're being paid 100% of the salary for 20% less work. And the reality is that residents are now faced in South Cambridgeshire with a part-time council. But it is not just over the border in South Cambridgeshire that we need to be concerned about, because there have been actions and comments within this authority of which are of cause for concern. So if council backs this motion tonight, we will be sending a clear and unambiguous message that North Hertfordshire District Council does not and will not support a part-time week for our staff. It does not support a 4-day working week. Now, I will reference the cost to the council because I estimate it at £3 million or over £3 million. And that's on the lower end of the scale if we were to implement such a policy. And that's money I'm sure that, and it's somewhat fitting, isn't it, that we're at the budget meeting tonight, and I'm sure it's money that this council can seldom afford. But I could talk and touch upon the productivity impacts, because since 1991, productivity in the private sector has grown by 26%. Compared to government services, it's actually fallen by 16%. But council will be pleased to hear that my 2 main points focus around actually delivering good value for money for our residents. Because surely our residents deserve better than a part-time council. Our residents work hard in order to provide for themselves and their families. They work hard in order to put food on the table. They work hard in order to pay their bills, and they work hard in order to pay their ever-increasing council tax bill. And therefore, it's not unreasonable, or I would argue unjust, for them to expect the public servants, because that is what the staff here and ourselves are, to work a full 5-day week and to ensure that this council is delivering them for them all week, every week. If you don't find on that argument, then look at the motion where it says, and there is a legal argument of which to be made, because under Part 1 of the Local Government Act of 1999, a piece of legislation which I believe was brought in under the last Labour government, which is good to see, of course. It wasn't one of the pieces of legislation of which vandalised the Constitution, but that's going on to a different direction. But it says that local authorities have a best value duty to ensure that they deliver good value for money for their residents. Now, South Cambridgeshire have already been served with by the Secretary of State a best value notice, of which puts them on notice that legal proceedings could begin and could start against them. So if you want to avoid costly legal proceedings, if this policy ever were to be implemented in North Hertfordshire, then back this motion. Now, I asked the chair to extend my speaking time because I know that there have been a number of concerns regarding this motion of which have been raised. And I just want to take the opportunity to address those concerns because it is important that everyone is clear on what this motion seeks to achieve, because this motion is not restrictive in nature. It is preventative. It seeks to ensure that a 4-day working week whereby staff who work on a full-time equivalent or a whole-time equivalent basis have their working hours reduced by 20%, but retain 100% of their pay is not implemented in this authority. Now, I've heard some concerns that have been raised regarding this motion that it impacts on the right of an employee to request flexible working. That is not the case. That is clearly a different right. And this motion does not seek to infringe on that right. To do so would be unlawful. And therefore, there has been an amendment which has been put in place and introduced in order to ensure that that point is clarified. Now, there has also been concern of which was raised that it would prevent the council delivering services over a 7-day period. Again, that is not the case. I have had sight of the employment figures. And there is not one officer within this authority of which is employed above a 1% or 0.1 full-time equivalent. There's no, for example, if you were to look at 7 days, it would be a 1.4%, 1.4. That's not the case here. And therefore, this motion will not impact on vital frontline services such as Careline or those officers who provide or support a regulatory service. It doesn't restrict officers or employees of the council who seek to work over their contracted hours in the week or who work on a weekend. And it won't impact on those policies, and it won't impact on employees, for example, claiming overtime. What this motion does is ensure that residents are getting good value for money, that they have a full-time council of which is working for them. So if you want to ensure that our residents don't get a part-time council, if you want to ensure that this authority fulfills all of its statutory obligations, if you want to ensure and show our residents that you are on their side, then I urge you to back this motion, and I commend it to the council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Munser. Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Levitt.
Happy to second, Chair, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Matt Barnes, would you like to move the amendment?
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of problems with this motion, only one of which has been addressed by the updated text. The amendment myself and Councillor Griffiths have put forward this evening does 3 things. Number 1, it removes the reference to meeting-free Fridays, since this has absolutely nothing to do with a 4-day week. Conservative colleagues might be interested to learn that a great deal of valuable work can be done outside of meetings. Put simply, a meeting-free day is still a work day, so this paragraph is entirely irrelevant to the motion and ought to be removed. Number 2, the amendment clarifies the council's position that it has no plans to pursue alternative working arrangements during the next civic year, as Councillor Munser may be implying. Colleagues will note there's no provision made for this anywhere in the very detailed budget papers being presented tonight. However, unlike the original motion, the amendment doesn't rule out the possibility of exploring future options in this area, depending on the available evidence and circumstances that it faces. As we'll hear later, with ongoing recruitment and retention challenges and in the continued absence of long-term funding arrangements, And with the South Cambs trial still in progress and yet to report results, it makes no sense whatsoever to remove indefinitely a tool which may yet prove to be effective in tackling those challenges. And thus, one which may ultimately be shown to provide better long-term value for residents. There's obviously a topic which evokes strong opinions on both sides, but the fact is we don't really know yet whether the outcome of this trial or any other similar trial, nor how applicable their findings will be to our future situation. The prudent thing to do in that situation is to give ourselves time to see what the evidence shows, and this amendment provides for that. Finally, the amendment takes one more important step of reaffirming in very clear terms our position that we support fully the right of South Cambridgeshire and any other local authority, for that matter, to determine its own affairs. It's fundamental to localism that local authorities should be free to make local decisions in the interests of their residents without unsolicited interference from central government. As elected local councillors, this ought to be a principle that we can all agree on. And I hope that after considering these changes, councillors from all parties will be able to give their support to the amendment and to the amended motion. Thank you.
Is there a seconder to this amendment, please? Councillor Griffiths.
Happy to second, Chair, and I waive my right to speak for the moment.
Reserve. It's all right, we understood, not a problem at all. We shall move on to the debate. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair. For me, this motion, I just don't see the relevance of it because at current there's no direct plans to implement this, and I understand this is preventative. But if South Cambs turns around and shows that there is incredibly positive productivity, that things are actually working better, why would we restrict ourselves in this way? Now, I'm not saying right now that I advocate a 4-day working week by any means, but if data showed that it was more productive, why would we remove the option from ourselves before we even know what data looks like? Of course, in a time where councils are struggling, where councils are going into economic collapse, we need to keep every option open and ensure that we can provide the best for our constituents.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. This motion prior to the amendment is a very strange one to me because it sort of answers its own question in the text of the amendment. As a council, we have a legal duty, a statutory duty, to make arrangements to secure continuous improvement, the Kaizen principle that Toyota introduced, in the way its functions are exercised, having a regard to combination of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Now, we should, as a council, deliver that to all of our residents. And there's a huge amount of data out there from the private sector and interesting data from South Cambridgeshire as well, that to deliver that economy, that efficiency and that effectiveness, a 4-day working week would actually enhance and improve council services. The evidence shows from a huge amount of studies across the world that workers on a 4-day week are more effective. They're more dedicated to their duty. They're healthier. They're happier. They deliver more for the same amount of money. So we hear about all of this talk about, oh, it'll cost the council this or that. Personally, I think it's nonsense. I don't think so. I think actually the residents will get more for the council tax that they pay to us. They will get more out of this council if we had the opportunity to explore a 4-day working week. And actually, there are no plans to do so. But why should we restrict ourselves to it? We have a legal duty to deliver the most efficient, effective council that we can. And if that means a 4-day working week, great, let's do it. Let's not stop ourselves on some sort of made up or ineffective statements that come from central government. Let's actually do what works for our residents. And I fully support the amendment made by Councillor Barnes there. I know he's really gone into the detail of it, and I asked everybody to support it because, as we say, there are no plans to do it, but I think we absolutely should be looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Munzer for the additional work that he did in trying to take what was initially quite a premature and, in my opinion, poorly conceived motion, which created some ambiguity and potential risk for this authority, and try to shape it into something which might be of benefit. I commend his efforts. I don't think that he quite got there, though. I also need to just sort of pick up some of the comments that Councillor Munster made in his preamble to the motion, specifically around actions and comments within this council that have been taken towards moving towards a 4-day working week. This council isn't currently considering implementing a 4-day working week. There have been no actions taken in that direction, like many authorities, and indeed, like many organisations within the private sector as well. This authority is constantly looking at ways that we can improve, ways we can support staff, and innovations within the employment market. Now, we are conscious as well of our retention and recruitment issues that we face. We will look at the pay policy later on this evening as well, and also some additionality around the feedback we've had from the Green Book consultation on pay. I'll save that for later in this evening, colleagues. However, we know that local government does struggle with recruitment and retention of staff. So why would we not look at all of the options on the table, especially when one of our neighbouring authorities is trialling and piloting a scheme which may result in them recruiting staff, which we would potentially like to retain or indeed recruit to ourselves. I'm also concerned, however, that as commendable as Councillor Barnes' efforts were in pulling together the amendment to this motion, that equally it restricts us in a sense. Why would we bind the hands of an incoming administration in May 2024 and prevent it from taking steps which could potentially help support our hardworking staff within this council authority? If there were innovation in a particular space that could result in better and more efficient service delivery to our residents, then we ought to be exploring that, and we ought to be able to implement it if we find that that is the relevant and right thing to do. I'm also conscious that a 4-day organisational week does kind of feel a little bit ambiguous as well in that sense. And we do have staff who, their contract might require them to work more than 4 or 5 days. It might be a number of hours. There might very well be people on 0-hour contracts in there as well that work for our organisation, and the contractors that we employ on waste and on leisure services. So I think that it's quite difficult really for us to proceed with the resolution here, colleagues, in a way that is meaningful, that is appropriate, that is tangible, and that doesn't unduly prevent this authority from taking action that actually we really ought to think seriously about in the future if we are going to be supporting the people that deliver our services. Because let's remember, colleagues, as much as councillors like to think that we run the show, we work on the business, not in the business. It is our staff, it is our officers, it is those people that are employed by our contractors who do the hard work, and we ought to be doing everything that we can to support those people that work incredibly hard for this local authority and our residents.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Good Chair. Just reinforcing the points that are proposed by Councillor Munster. If you follow the perverse logic of working less and producing the same amount, it would clearly make sense to work even less, if that's possible, and then work for 3 days and produce even more. And that, I'm afraid, is the logic of parts of this non-productive sector, and so on and so on and so on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Willoughby.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I agree with Councillor Dennis. I'm unsure why anyone believes that we would operate as a 4-day council instead of a 7 as we currently, and obviously will continue to do so. I'm not sure. Is it being suggested that we would close any of our services for 3 days a week if we were only doing 4? That's nonsense. We are, as many other local authorities across the country are too, facing difficulties with recruiting and retaining staff across several service areas. We're unable to provide the very best pay packages and benefits that our hardworking staff undoubtedly deserve, and we should be concerned that we will see the loss of staff to other local authorities that are willing to embrace new ways of working and flexibility if we're not. We must, as a council, look at any way that we can work with our officers and residents to provide great service for the best value we can. We should not be tying our hands for anything that might allow us to work in the best way possible. I absolutely won't be supporting this motion or the amendment, though I do think the work that Councillor Barnes and Councillor Griffith on this, have done on this is very commendable. But I do want to finish on this point. We should not be political point scoring using our officers. We may want to make political points about the way that our council operates, but we don't need to treat our staff as pawns.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I'm happy to listen to the debate and consider the amendment, I'm concerned with the underlying basis of the substantive motion. There's a danger here that we're acknowledging a backward-looking and negative narrative around flexible working, a pre-COVID narrative, and frankly, a prehistoric narrative. With this amendment, I fear we seriously risk merely polishing a terrible motion. At a time when, like most councils, we struggle with recruitment and retention, it seems retrograde to turn our backs on potentially attractive options for our staff. On the positive side, I'm relieved the Conservative motion doesn't seek to withdraw from the working time regulations, abolish bank holidays, or reintroduce child labour to reduce the cost of the new bins contract. Perhaps that's next month. More seriously, my understanding is the South Cambridgeshire CAMS trial has proved popular with staff, and through helping with recruitment and retention has reduced agency costs. Anecdotally, I hear their trial has impacted on neighbouring councils who've lost staff to South Cams as a result. To conclude, I am not advocating whether or not we trial or pilot such a scheme ourselves, but I do believe we should keep our options open. In some staffing areas, such as planning, where we're in direct competition for officers with the private sector, we cannot realistically compete on salaries. We can compete on offering a fair work-life balance and making North Herts Council an attractive and forward-looking place to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plater.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a few things that we need to clear up here, because there have been some statements made about the 4-day work week that are justifiably untrue. From the website of South Cambs themselves, they say that under a 4-day work week, officers are expected to carry out 100% of their work in 80% of their time for 100% of the pay. I'll just read that again, just for clarity, that it's 100% of the work in 80% of the time. So there is no the same money for 20% less work. There is no productivity drop. Officers are expected to carry out all the work. Under this trial as well, the office at South Cambs has been open 5 days a week, and they've actually lengthened their opening times on a Wednesday as well. So the service level and the office being open hasn't been impacted. And in fact, where this trial is going on, they've found that the services that are involved in this trial, the number of complaints for the services have gone down, and they've actually saved money to the tune of £434,000 in recruiting full-time staff rather than agency, mostly, as Councillor Mason alluded to, in the planning department. But also, a 4-day work week is, I believe, is a good thing. You look at the trials from across the world. In Spain, a 4-day work week trial led to employees having higher self-perceived health status, reduced levels of stress. They were less tired, felt happier, and were more personally satisfied. In Japan, where Microsoft introduced a 4-week working trial in 2019, productivity went up by 40%. And back to South Cambs, even the leader of Cambridgeshire City Council, who share services such as their waste service with South Cambs, which has also gone to a 4-day week, has said that the service hasn't been impacted. And in fact, they've exceeded their collection target of 99.7%. Since January in South Cambs, which was when the trial started, the sickness rate has fallen by a third. Staff turnover has been reduced by 36%. I can keep going with the facts and the figures here, but it's quite obvious that under the 4-day work week trial in South Cambs, the same amount of work is being done in the 4 days. It's not impacted on the service provision or the amount of time that the office is open or the services for residents. In fact, it's delivered them more value. It's saved the council money. Productivity has gone up. I fail to see how a 4-day work week is in fact a bad thing. So just to finish, there is no reason I can see why this authority wouldn't look as an option to have a 4-day work week, especially in light of the recruitment and retention issues that I know we've all spoken about. And specifically, I know that there have been robust conversations held with Councillor Dennis and Councillor Strong and Councillor Hone at the JSCC as well. So we need to be doing all we can to ensure that we recruit and retain officers, that services are being delivered cost effectively and are being delivered for the benefit of our residents. And from all the trials, all the studies, all the results from a 4-day work week, this delivers positively on all of those. So I fail to see why we would pass a motion that in essence would tie our hands from doing something that has a net positive effect on would have a net positive effect on our council. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. You stole my statistics, so I just wanted to add, obviously, if you cast your minds back to the Victorian era, where people used to work for 6.5 days with a Saturday off, and it was considered the norm until people realised that it was, leading to early graves. It was leading to a lot of illnesses, and that is also boosted by the statistics mentioned by others. 71% of employees reported lower levels of burnout on a 4-day working week, and 39% were less stressed and therefore more productive. Mentioned before about Microsoft in Japan, but also there was a 4-day working week trial in our own country with over 30 businesses signed up for it, including a fish and chip shop, and all of them, after the trial had concluded, decided to keep it. I think it's also worth pointing out is that, just going back to my previous point, that we only did those things because it was the norm until we decided to change. And we should consider that this is one of those moments as well. Thank you.
Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. This was a difficult motion to word in the first place and to get across. And the point of it is we have a duty to provide value for money and our best service possible to the public. And that's what this motion was aimed at pointing out and making clear, that we want to provide, as a council, the best possible service. I've taken into account the points that Councillor Dennis made. The wording's not ideal. No, it's not. It's a very difficult motion to word. Quite interested to hear some of the reports about South Cambs, because they haven't actually finalised their report yet, I believe, and it's still only in draft stages, and there were some changes, so we can't really compare it with that. I think with that the amendment that's come through, I can actually support that amendment for 1 year, and then we look again at it. Councillor Dennis made the point we are putting a restriction on an incoming administration after May. However, that's not going to, something like this isn't going to happen quickly, isn't going to happen instantly. And I think with a new administration, which it certainly will be, and a very different administration with 51 members and possibly a very different makeup of councillors, I believe keeping things as they are, which is what this amendment does, for another year at least, and seeing what happens at South Cambs and in other places and here, is the best way forward on this one. Therefore, I will support the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Compton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure South Cambridgeshire will be particularly appreciative with Councillor Plater, insinuating that the council staff were essentially twiddling their thumbs for 20% of the time. I certainly don't think that's the case with North Herts, but perhaps Councillor Munster does have a point about productivity in councils across the country. I have one problem with the amendment, and we are supposed to be discussing the motion and the amendment. I do feel we've gone slightly off track with this. Within the amendment by Councillor Barnes, it says that, and I quote, and that it will continue to fill its statutory obligations whilst ensuring the provision of cost-effective and efficient delivery to services in North Hertfordshire. Now, if Councillor Barnes was right about Meeting Free Friday being irrelevant, I'm fairly sure that's an irrelevant statement as well, because essentially all it's saying is the status quo, we will continue to do that. And it just seems pointless to be in there. But if we take that out, because I do feel that's irrelevant, because we should be doing that regardless, all this amendment's really saying is we're not moving to a 4-day working week this year. We've now been discussing this for over half an hour. I'm really hoping that we're going to have less filibustering for the rest of the night, because we've got quite a long agenda. But I was just hoping we could move on to a vote, please. Thank you.
Right. We're going to move on from the debate to the vote on the amended motion. However, I can invite Councillor Munster the right of reply.
I will briefly, no.
Thank you.
Am I allowed to?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Forgive me. I will just say it is somewhat disappointing that the Liberal Democrats, and it is only Liberal Democrats of which are currently supporting this motion, or the amendment, shall I say, have decided to water down the provisions within it. Because what we're saying to our residents is that we're saying, well, we're not going to implement a 4-day working week for the next year, but it's going to be a possibility in the future. And Councillor Barnes referenced Meeting Free Fridays. Well, that's not a policy of which I support. That's not a policy of which I know Councillor Morris supports either. I'm sure many of us work in organisations where we've all sat in meetings and we figured and sort of thought, you know, this meeting could have been an email. Now, that's what our officers and our staff and everyone should be asking before they schedule a meeting. We're all grown-ups here. We're all adults. We can all manage our time. We shouldn't have a policy of which is seeking to limit when we can or cannot have a meeting. It is purely restrictive in nature, but I will be supporting the amendment tonight because I want to ensure that our residents get a cost-effective and efficient delivery of service. They have staff that are working 5 days a week. They have a full-time council, and I would urge all those to support this amendment.
Thank you. In that case, we should go to the vote, which will be a substantive motion as we are going through with the motion. So we will go to the vote now, please. Voting on the amended motion. My apologies. We've had a proposer and a seconder, so we have gone through to the vote. I did say that we are having the amendment as a substantive motion. Okay, if we want to go on to the two votes, that's fine. But I did make that decision that it was going to be a substantive. But I shall go over with the service director and confirm that.
Both the proposer and the seconder of the original amended motion have accepted the amendment, and therefore on that basis you're going to vote on the amended motion as proposed. Okay, is that hopefully clear? Yeah.
We'll go to the vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you.
Could you use your microphone, please? No problems, Councillor Barnard.
The screens aren't showing the people who
We are
speaking.
aware, unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to change that mid-meeting. I'm
Oh, it's
sorry.
fine. I
Thank
didn't know
you.
whether
Yes,
you
we
were
have
aware.
attempted.
That's fine. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. We shall now move on to item 7, items referred from other committees. 7A, Cabinet Revenue Budget, will be considered with item 8. 7B, Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Call to Account Lord Lister Hotel, will be considered as a standalone item. 7C, the Cabinet Council Tax Premiums for Empty and Second Homes, will be considered with item 9. And 7D, Cabinet Investment Strategy, Integrated Capital and Treasury, to be considered with item 10. As such, we'll go on to 7B, the Call to Account Lord Lister Hotel. Prior to any questions or debate or statements, please may I remind members that the matter is being considered in open session and to be mindful so that anything said does not stray into exempt information. This is the referral from Overview and Scrutiny. Councillor Compton, I understand that whilst you are the current chair of Overview and Scrutiny, you'll be handing the presentation of the referral to the former chair of Overview and Scrutiny, given that the matter was considered whilst Councillor Levitt was the chair. Councillor Compton, can you confirm this?
That is correct, Chair. Thank you for reading out what I was about to, because I'd lost it on my phone and I was about to say the same thing once I'd found it.
No problems. I therefore invite the former chair of Overview and Scrutiny, Councillor David Levitt, to present the referral.
Thank you, Chair. This comes as a referral to Council because it originally came to Council as a presentation in the first place, which was then said to be taken up by Overview and Scrutiny, which we did. We did the first ever call to account on this one. I'm not going to go into detail. Everything you need is in the paperwork. There is referral back to Council for questions or comment, and all the paperwork is there. So I'm open, Chair, to take any questions or comments on my report.
Are there any questions? There are not. Therefore, the recommendation is that the referred report attached as Appendix A, together with the copy of the lessons learnt that the appropriate section of the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of September 2022 be noted. However, people have now decided they do want to speak on it, so I am going to let them. Councillor Strong.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. This item does go back to a decision that was taken on the 13th of August in 2021, and I am obviously minded that there are very numbers of people in the chamber tonight that weren't elected at that point. But this report does, I think, come to a conclusion that the way that decision was taken was a mistake. And that did come out in the call to account meeting that was held on the 28th of September. Now, we are asked to look at the lessons learned. And there's nothing in the lessons learned that I can find that actually identifies what this council should do to prevent it happening again. And I would expect something that asks that we review our constitution about how emergency decisions are taken and updated accordingly, so that if a decision is going to be taken like this under urgency, it does do it with a consultation of all affected ward members or an area of the council. It also, when I go back at the constitution and look at how urgent decisions can be, it does say that following the decision taker will provide a full report to the next available council meeting explaining the decision. And I have to say, I don't recall that actually ever happened. Maybe it got overlooked because the call account was then going to take place. But again, and I know I do bore some of you of the fact that I do like process, but I do think we ought to, again, be mindful that if that is the process that we should follow, we have in our constitution, we should follow it. Thank you.
I've just been informed we did have a report to full council, which is why it was then passed over to Overview and Scrutiny. But I can double check that and forward that on to you after the meeting. Councillor Bryant.
Thank you.
I'm speaking as Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, both for Councillor Levitt and for Councillor Compton. And first of all, I wanted to reply to Councillor Strong, but that has now been clarified. So in fact, it did go to full council. But can I just clarify that this is Councillor Levitt's report? Councillor Levitt decided to focus very much on the process because he was very concerned that it was the first call for account that we seem to have ever had. Nobody here had got any experience of calls for accounts. And so I wanted to unpick that. But the lessons identified in next steps are taken directly from the minutes and are those of Councillor Dennis, Anthony Roach and Martin Lawrence. And both at the meeting that we had, Overview and Scrutiny Extraordinary Meeting, Chairs Meeting in January, and at Cabinet, I did ask Councillor Levitt to actually clarify that he had nothing else to add to this. And at both occasions, he said, no, this is how he wanted it to be. So I think we need to accept what Councillor Levitt has put forward and the work he's done. Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I just need to make some clarifications on this document. I've raised this with Councillor Levitt already. Some of these are quite dull. I apologise. Some of them procedural. There are 3 ward councillors in Highbury, not 2, as the report suggests. So that does need to be put into the report. On the project board meeting of the 29th of July, 2 of the ward councillors were present, myself and Councillor Paul Clark, who's sadly not with us. What is omitted from this report, I think is important to include, is that Councillor Clark and myself requested that local residents were fully consulted about this scheme before it went ahead. We were later told that the scheme would not go ahead, and therefore no further consultation with ward councillors was conducted. The next thing the ward councillors knew, the scheme was open and operational. There is an email train to this effect, so it can be evidenced. I think Councillor Levitt was unaware of this situation at the time the report was produced, so I think that's important to relate. And then there is a comment in this report that suggests that Councillor Clark did not raise any objections at a later meeting. My recollection, Councillor Strong may be able to recall as well, that that is not the case. He did raise the objections later on. So I have forwarded this information on to Councillor Levitt, and if anybody would like to know more in detail, I will share it, but I do not know how much more I can discuss in this section of the meeting without breaching part 2.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Right, we're going to move on to the recommendation. As I said earlier, the referred report attached as Appendix A, together with a copy of the lessons learnt and the appropriate sections of the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of September 2022, be noted. May I have a proposer, please? Councillor Compton.
I'm happy to propose, Chair.
And a seconder, Councillor Bryant.
Second.
We will move on to the debate. There is no debate. In that case, we shall move on to the vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Item 9. Council tax premiums for empty and second homes. This is a referral from Cabinet. Can I invite the Leader of the Council, Councillor Elizabeth Dennis, to present the referral?
Thank you very much, Chair. So colleagues will note that Cabinet considered the empty homes strategy and the council tax premiums for empty and second homes at Cabinet. My thanks go to Councillor Prendergast and his Deputy Councillor Winstanley for the work that they've done around the empty homes, as well as to Councillor Albert and to Councillor Barnes for the continued hard work that they do around the financial situation of this local authority, and indeed to all of the officers who've supported our work. following changes to the council tax premiums on the empty homes, it was there's a number of points that have been suggested. Those are set out in the report. Cabinet agreed with the referral that came to us, and we commend the policy to this meeting. So, colleagues, I'm going to boldly assume that everyone's read the papers, and given we've got a lot on the agenda, I shall say nothing further.
Thank you. Are there any questions? In which case, can I invite Councillor Ian Albert to present the item, please?
Cheers. Thank you, Chair. As I say, this report proposes changes to the council tax premiums on empty and second homes and follows the government's updated legislation in relation to this. Two aspects to consider: empty homes and then second homes. Legislation previously enabled local authorities to introduce a council tax premium based on the length of time a property has been empty. Premiums are paid in addition to the 100% council tax liability. For example, properties empty for 2 years but less than 5 can receive 100% premium. Properties empty for 5 years but less than 10, 200% premium, and properties empty for more than 10 years are 300% premium. In 2019, the council considered the premiums above and opted to introduce the current 100% premium for properties empty for more than 2 years as of the 1st of April 2020. The recent change in legislation allows us also to apply a premium on homes that have been empty for more than 1 year. Analysis carried out in December reported there were 157 properties that have been empty for over 2 years. Of these, 121 are regularly paying the 200% council tax, which equates to approximately 292,000, which is split across the major preceptors. 7 had not had the premium applied, that was using our discretions, and 29 are not currently paying regularly. Despite this, the number of empty homes continues to rise and brings a number of challenges to the district. The empty home strategy was considered and agreed by Cabinet, and this set out our plans to tackle the issues more widely. But this paper is specifically in relation to our ability to increase council tax premiums to encourage empty homes to be brought back into occupation. The rise of empty homes and second homes is a national challenge, and inconsistencies within the legislation have been identified whereby a premium can be avoided by the owner furnishing an empty home, which turns it into a second home, which currently has a maximum charge of 100% and no premium. At North Herts, we also give at the moment a 10% discount on second homes. The proposal here, as I'll come to, is to remove the current 10% discount and apply the 100% premium, effectively charging second homes 200% council tax. Government has introduced sections within the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act to address these inconsistencies, and our recommendations at 2.1.1 to 2.1.3 reflect those changes. We contacted a number of our neighbouring authorities to compare their approaches, and some of those already charging the maximum allowable premiums as set out in the paper. The only change that we'll be introducing for the 1st of April 24 will affected properties empty over 5 years only, will impact 43 properties, and we will immediately write to those property owners to make them aware of this change. Changes to premiums on empty homes can be effective from the 1st of April 24, whilst premiums on second homes can only be implemented from the 1st of April 25, as 1 year's notice is required. The expected impact of additional premiums is that homeowners will be encouraged to bring empty properties into use and revert the use of second homes to primary residences, which support the aims of our empty homes strategy. The policy will be finalised once all of the exceptions have been confirmed by government. However, we expect this to include properties undergoing probate, properties being actively marketed, undergoing major repairs, perhaps annexes forming part of the main dwelling, job-related dwellings, seasonal homes. So our recommendations, as I say, that from the 1st of April 24 until March 25, the following interim premiums are introduced. Around properties empty for 1 year, but less than 2 will not receive a premium. Properties empty for more than 2 years, but less than 5 years will receive 100% premium. Properties empty for 5 years but less than 10 years, 150% premium, and properties empty for more than 10 years, a 200% premium. From the 1st of April 25, the council adopts the following full premium levy rates: that empty for 1 year but less than 5, the 100% premium; properties empty for 5 years but less than 10, 200%; and properties empty for more than 10 years, a 300% premium. And that from we're also proposing and like to amend, obviously, the recommendation 2.2, that from the 1st of April 25, the 10% discount is removed and 100% premium is levied on all properties that are determined as a second home, subject to any exceptions once these have been confirmed by regulations, and that the service director customers, in consultation with the executive member for finance and IT, is delegated authority to make any amendments following further confirmation of those regulations. Chair, I'd like to move these proposals in front of you. I hope that they will be welcome and the council will unanimously adopt them.
Thank you, Councillor Albert. Are there any questions regarding this, please? In that case, the recommendation 2.1, that in accordance with section 11B and 11C of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, as amended by section 2 of the Ratings of Properties in Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Act 2018 and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, Cabinet considers increasing the council tax premiums on empty homes and introducing a new premium on second homes in a phased approach as follows. 2.1.1, that from the 1st of April 2025, the council adopts the following full premium levy rates. Properties empty for 1 year but less than 5 will receive 100% premium. Properties empty for 5 years but less than 10, a 200% premium. And properties empty for more than 10 years, a 300% premium. That 2.1.2, from 1st of April 2024 until 31st of March 2025, the following interim premiums are introduced. Properties empty for 1 year but less than 2 will not receive a premium. Properties empty for more than 2 years but less than 5 will receive a 100% premium. Properties empty for 5 years but less than 10, 150% premium. And properties empty for more than 10 years, a 200% premium. 2.2. That from the 1st of April 2025, a 100% premium is levied on all properties that are determined as a second home, subject to any exemptions once they have been confirmed by regulations, and that the service director / customers, in consultation with the executive member for finance and IT, is delegated authority to make any amendments following further confirmation of the regulations. Can I have a proposer? We had a proposal, which was Councillor Albert. My apologies. A seconder?
Clarify that that the 2.2 should read that from the 1st of April 25, that 10% discount is removed and then 100% premium is levied on all properties that are determined. That was my amended recommendation.
Please bear with me 1 second. I believe that is an issue with my paperwork, so yes, I'm happy to accept that. A seconder, Councillor Winstanley.
Yeah, happy to second.
Okay, so can we move to the debate, please? Councillor Morris.
Chair, I just have to declare an interest. I think I'm ashamed to tell you that I have a second home in Norfolk, so I guess I should be excluded from this. Terribly sorry.
No, that's all right. It's not in North Hertfordshire, so you're fine.
Is that okay?
Absolutely fine.
Shouldn't have said
Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep it brief, but firstly, just say thank you to Councillor Albert, Councillor Barnes, and officers for producing this. I very much welcome it. It complements our recently approved empty home strategy very nicely, and it will be an important tool in bringing empty properties back into use. And it demonstrates our commitment to supporting our communities. Empty homes are often a source of complaints. They become run down and dilapidated, and they can become a blight on our communities. As people are probably aware, we are in a housing crisis. And it is right and absolutely proper that we do all we can to address these shortages. This will go some way to helping that, and we should all be supportive of this. Furthermore, occupied homes help to boost our local economy and help to promote a healthy environment for everyone. So I hope everyone can get behind this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt, please.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to support this, and I'm pleased to hear that the discretions will still be applied as and when applicable. We did discuss that over group scrutiny. There's some concern about that, particularly where things like probate are concerned, which can take huge amounts of time. So that discretion is very much appreciated on that one. And could I just make a comment that if we could make sort of go over and beyond what's required in the way of formal legal notification and make sure we get, I think you said, Councillor Albert, you're going to send letters out fairly soon to those 43. That would be really good to be proactive on that. It's not going to raise huge amounts of money, but as Councillor Prendergast says, it does an important thing and brings only, albeit a few, but it does bring more homes back into use.
Thank you very much. Councillor Willoughby.
Apologies if I'm wrong, and this might be a small thing, but on recommendation 2.1, where it says cabinet considers, should that be council considers? Apologies if I'm asking a foolish question. Yeah, that's what we can't. Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm catching it now.
Bear with me 1 second. Councillor Willoughby, I'm going to move on to the next question while we go over this to keep things moving through. Next question. Next comment. Councillor Thake.
Yes, thank you, sir. Look, it may well be in there, but there's an awful lot of paperwork in here, and I finally got the ModGov working for the first time for years. I've got the paperwork, and I have assiduously tried to read it, so, but I need a question of clarification. Clearly, I do not have a problem with bringing back empty properties which are willfully held empty for whatever reason. We need to pass this motion, but I'm uncertain as to where the definition of an empty property comes in terms of its capability to be occupied. If the property is lacking services for whatever reason, would that be then considered not a property that is capable of being occupied, and therefore the time frame would not start?
I accept the point of clarification. Let me look into that right now for you, Councillor Thake, if you can give me just 1 moment. Okay. I'm going to ask the officers that are not in the room to give you the full answer. I believe it's in legislation, and we follow the legislation. However, I will just go over now and ask if either of the councillors are either of the officers are able to answer that question, please.
Good evening, Chair. It's Geraldine Goodwin. I can answer that question. All properties that are contained in the domestic valuation list attract a band. So by default, we would have to charge council tax on it. If the property is unfit for habitation, then we would have to look at what that what that entails. Because if it's got no roof on it, for argument's sake, we would look to go to the valuation office to get it removed from the list. But if there are if there are no services there for a particular reason, we would need to, like I say, use our discretion on those ones. Most of the time, the premium would just be applied, and we would expect our residents to come to us and let us know what issues they're having with the property, and if there's anything we can do to help them. But ordinarily, the premium would automatically go on.
Thank you very much for confirming that, Jerry. Does that answer your question, Councillor Thake?
Yes, sir, it does. The reason I asked it is because you might gather I have got a resident who's got a problem, hasn't been able to connect services to the property, not through his own fault, because the utilities have just failed to respond. And clearly, if the council has got discretion, one would hope he must make those arguments to officers, and they must. I'm content that there is a capacity to have the argument and for people to make a decision. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Willoughby, there is going to be a changing of the wording, which I will read when we go through. The changing of the wording will be 2.1. As we go through that, in accordance with section 11B and 11C of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, as amended by section 2 of the Rating Properties in Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Act 2018 and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, will now read from here: Council agrees to increasing the council tax premiums on empty homes and introducing a new premium on second homes in a phased approach as follows. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Councillor Compton.
Thank you, Chair. When this paper came through Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I was largely happy with this. It's just a couple of requests for next year, really, since not a lot is changing this year, particularly around second homes. One of the things I raised was that I was a little bit concerned that it could affect businesses quite heavily in North Hertfordshire. Number of second homes might be run through the likes of Airbnb and such, where actually it brings tourism into the authority, and it also provides an income and a job for someone that might own that property. What I'm very hopeful for is next year, if we are looking at raising the premium for second homes, that some work is done to see how many of those businesses are actually run and how much money that does bring into the economy, the local economy, because there is quite a big drive, and there has been for the last few years, around visiting areas in North Herts. So I think it's really important that we look at that and just make sure we're not actually going to cause issues to businesses and actually prevent people from actually earning a living there. Around that was section 2.2, sorry. In section 2.1.2, where we discuss the empty homes premiums and where premiums do go up to a 200% premium, as an example, one of the other concerns I have, and that wasn't particularly addressed at Overview and Scrutiny Committee, was actually how can we help people that might have an empty home get it up to standard to actually sell. So at the moment, someone might have an empty home, they might have a will to do it up, actually improve the situation of that property and then sell it. Might have been handed down by families, and it might be, their ancestral home, if you call it, or it might just be their parents or brothers and sisters, and actually they held on to it for a while because of bereavement. Now that house might have gone into disrepair, and people might not have the money to actually do it up. And I feel the council should offer some sort of assistance to people to actually potentially do those houses up, either a loan or a grant, where we actually do get the money back at point of sale, so we're not losing out, but it actually means that people aren't going to get ripped off by a bunch of people that will just take it, convert it, and sell it on for a profit. And I feel that it is important that we look at the matters of why these houses are empty, and if we can help people actually improve those situations in those empty homes, that would be beneficial, because then that house would still get back on the market. It would still meet our strategy of actually bringing more housing back into use, but it would actually mean that local residents would actually be able to take that house and not lose out dramatically on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Compton. I would point out we are in the budget meeting today. As such, if this is something you want to have considered, I would suggest, unfortunately, bringing it to the next meeting so that it can be considered in the next budget. So I shall leave that with you. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. It was more a point of, when we look at actually implementing this in 2025, having a thought about it then over the next year, rather than put it into this year's budget.
Thank you. Right. I have no more debate. We will move on to the vote. We have our proposer and seconder, so we will now move on to the vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Item 8. Revenue Budget 24-25. As a reminder, as per the Constitution, there will be a recorded vote on this item. Referral from Cabinet. Can I invite the Leader of the Council, Councillor Elizabeth Dennis, to present the referral?
Thank you very much, Chair. I will attempt not to steal too much of Councillor Albert's thunder on this, as I'm sure colleagues are all eagerly anticipating his speech this year. Thank you. So this evening, the council has a duty to set a budget for the forthcoming year. And as we will explain, that includes a prudent use of reserves over the next few years. And I'm sure Councillor Albert and Mr. Cooper will be quite happy and able to explain that once reserves are spent, they are gone, they are done, and the potential financial implications around that. So the word prudent is going to be key when we are considering not just the matter before us this evening, but how we conduct our business and manage our finances moving forward. So in September 2021, we set a vision as a council and as a district, and that was deliberately a medium-term plan, and it's therefore not changed. Our priorities have remained that we put people first. We are sustainable, both in terms of the environment, but also our finances, and we will work together to secure a brighter future for everybody in our district. Now, it was our intention that the council plan and the medium-term financial strategy went hand in hand with each other. We wanted to see an end to budget-led policy making and return to a place where the budget served and supported the delivery of policies. And I think that we have succeeded in adopting that approach. We've ensured that our priorities and our resources are aligned. And while the plan has remained unchanged in what it's been trying to achieve, the reality, unfortunately, is that we are still dealing with the ongoing impacts of, I'm going to use the word austerity because that's where this started. Austerity has now been rebranded as a cost of living crisis. However, what is also happening is a significant cut in funding from central government, and that funding that we do receive from central government is insufficient and gives us very, very little ability to plan as we move forward. Indeed, colleagues, no business would operate under the constraints that local government is forced to work under. We also know that, as well as the immediate impacts of inflation, I won't reference previous fiscal events, that we need to be ready for increased costs from the new waste and street cleansing contract, which will come into play from May 2025. So while the budget that we're proposing this evening continues the journey that we set out on in the council plan and how we will fund our priorities for the coming year, unfortunately, we have got to face the fact that we can't deliver everything that we want to deliver in the timescales that we previously might have liked to have delivered those things, because we do not have the resources to do so. We have got to plan on the basis that a new government funding formula will continue to reduce the funding that we retain from business rates. We don't know how the short-term funding guarantees that government have provided will play out in the longer term. It's very unlikely that we will end up with a multi-year settlement in the next autumn statement, and goodness knows what happens beyond that point. Overall, this means that we have got to try and plan with very, very little certainty over what our future funding will be. If you were running a business, you would not run it like this under these pressures. Reflecting issues across local government, we are struggling to recruit and retain staff, as colleagues will be aware from the debate earlier this evening. Mainly it's because we can't afford to pay enough. Reference forward and foreshadow the pay review item that's later on in the agenda. Now, this ability to recruit and retain quality people to the sector and to this council affects and impacts on the projects that we can deliver and how we are able to deliver them. So we're working on the assumption that we will need to be able to deliver at least £2.7 million of savings each and every year by 28-29. Now, those savings could come from efficiencies, service transformation, income generation, or service changes. But years of austerity which has been conflated and turned into and rebranded as a cost of living crisis, mean that the opportunities for those efficiencies have pretty much gone. There's not a lot of slack left in the system. There's not a lot of fat left for us to trim. We will need to focus on service transformation to improve the way people interact with us and also to save some money. But that's not going to deliver all of the savings that we need to find. We therefore have to plan on the basis that we might need to deliver a significant amount of savings through service changes. But we will consult with our residents before we make any changes to understand the services that are most valued. And colleagues will be cognizant of the recent resident survey that this council carried out and the feedback around that on the themes of listening to residents, engaging with residents. And I think Councillor Albert will have more to say in his speech moving forwards on how we are going to engage with our residents on that. I'd love to ensure that the burden of council tax is eased on our residents. But the reality is that we just can't do it. It's not viable if we want to be a council that delivers the services that our residents value and are sustainable in the medium term. While the assumptions on funding guarantees claim that they are before decisions on council tax, when it comes to us setting a budget for 2025 to 26, experience has shown us that the calculations will be based on the assumption that we have increased council tax by the maximum that we are allowed. And indeed, Jeremy Hunt expects all local authorities to increase by the maximum this year. So we must propose that council tax is increased on that basis and in line with the medium-term financial strategy. This will be a 2.99% increase or less than 15 pence per week for a Band D property, with increases on other bands pro rata to that.
Councillor Dennis, I'm going to have to speed you up.
No, that's fine. I am getting to the end. I do apologise. Oh, yes. Colleagues will also note, I think with interest, the increases proposed by both the County Council and the Police and Crime Commissioner mean that our share of the overall council tax bill continues to go down. So we're getting less as a slice and continuing to have to deliver more for residents with less money. We shared our draft budget proposals with all members. I'm pleased that we have had tabled this evening some comments from the opposition, and we've also asked for contributions for ways that we can save money, either through spending less, delivering more, or generating income.
Councillor
and I
Dennis,
hope that the
I am gonna have to
participation
stop you now.
has
Thank
been
you.
reasonable. If you'd allow me to finish, that was the final sentence, Chair. Sorry.
Well, you are a minute and a half over, so please.
I will now ask Councillor Albert to expand on our proposed budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I will stand for this one. And I'd like to thank the chair for granting me some additional time permission for my budget speech. And like this budget, I will be prudent and careful in using that time. And following our debate at the last council meeting, I'm proud to have taken the white ribbon promise and wear that ribbon tonight, as does Councillor Allen. We must never remain silent about violence against women. I want to thank Ian Cooper and his team for all their hard work, and my Deputy Councillor Matt Barnes for his support and advice. Chair, I'm proud of what this Labour and Liberal Democrat joint administration has achieved collectively for residents since 2019. In the face of the pandemic and then the cost of living crisis, we've protected our services, ensured our leisure facilities like swimming pools remain financially viable, ended playground closures, got our museum working as a fantastic resource and facility for the district. How different to the situation we inherited. We have recognised that the range of services we provide or help to coordinate, like our food provision network, are good for the health and well-being of our community, good for our residents across the towns and villages of North Herts, and of course, our businesses. But this evening, we need to set a balanced budget. We're in the 6th year of 1-year settlements from government. This is no way to run local authorities properly. We need to be able to plan longer term. In setting a balanced budget that can and indeed does use, including using our reserves, and I make no secret of that point. But the use of those valuable reserves has to be prudent and cautious and considered over the medium term alongside a plan to balance in-year funding and expenditure in that period. So how are we using our reserves? 2025, 24-25, we're only planning on using previous business rate funding gains and not our general fund reserves. Rather than budgeting for business rate gains, we budget at our baseline funding level. We can then take and use those gains in later years when we know exactly what has been achieved. However, we are planning that we will need to use some of our general fund reserves over the next few years. Our general fund reserves are well above the minimum recommended by our Section 151 officer. The reserves are there for a rainy day, and this is truly, like today, a rainy day. However, as you'll see from Appendix C, even by 28-29, our general fund reserves are forecast to be over £10 million, significantly above the 2.46 million minimum balance. Whilst we acknowledge and welcome the 4% funding guarantee on core spending power, the phrase too little, too late comes to mind. The 4% guarantee makes assumptions around tax-based growth. So if, like us, the actual base growth is less than that assumed, your funding doesn't go up by the full amount promised. It's stated that the guarantee applies before any decisions on council tax increases. But recent history has shown us that in calculating funding in subsequent years, a council tax rise in line with the maximum allowed will be assumed. But the main issue that we already have huge levels of inflation baked into these budgets. In 15-16, our core spending power was 16.8 million. It took until last year for that to increase even in cash terms, having hit a low of 15.1 million in 18-19. Our 24-25 spending power is 9.5% higher than that in 2015-16. Welcome. But over the same period, CPI has increased by around 32%. So in real terms, that is a cut in funding of around 3.8 million. And as for when the rain will stop, in the absence of a multi-year funding settlement, we're left each year guessing what our funding might be. It may be a vain hope, but I like to think that a new government, after the general election, will value local government rather more than this one and will fund us appropriately. That would mean that any service changes won't need to be as bad as what we may face otherwise. We welcome the increase from 3% to 4% funding guarantee, but it was dependent on late lobbying by councils, groups representing councils, and indeed some MPs. Now, we're not making cuts now. This joint administration wants to continue to provide and support the services that our residents value for as long as we can, to improve the health and well-being of our district. Many of our residents are still living through a cost of living crisis. The impacts of the Truss Kwarteng era still resonate, especially with those paying rents and mortgages and on low incomes. And I hope if my Conservative colleagues disagree, I would be interested to hear tonight their alternative budget proposals. There haven't been any up to now, but maybe there will be some later. Subject to the elections in May, we'll be ready to make those difficult decisions when they're needed. We're setting out a plan on how we will consult with residents on the services they most value and how they are delivered. But we would do so having taken time to consult with our residents to understand the services they value most. The first of those difficult decisions is how much to raise council tax by. We're serious about being a council that delivers services to support our residents, then we need to increase our portion of council tax by the maximum allowed. This is what we set out in the medium-term financial strategy, what government will assume we've done in later years, and allegedly what the Department for Levelling Up are telling councils to do. This is in common with neighbouring local authorities of all different political colours. For Band D property in North Herts, the 2.99 increase on our element of the council tax is £7.51 per year, or less than 15 pence per week. That council tax enables North Herts Council to collect recycling and waste from over 58,000 households, clean 400 miles of streets, maintain 100 hectares of parks and green spaces, run the Letchworth, Hitchin and Royston leisure centres, maintain Letchworth and Hitchin outdoor pools and 4 splash parks in the district, provide housing and advice and homelessness support, including temporary accommodation needs. As we're all aware, we also collect council tax on behalf of the County Council and the Police and Crime Commissioner. For Band D, their annual increases are £80 and £13 respectively. That means, as Councillor Dennis said, our share of the bill residents will pay, even in unparished areas, is now less than 12%. A 2.99% increase generates an extra 380,000 versus no increase in the rate of council tax. But our banded council tax reduction scheme will continue to provide the support to those that are most in need. When we considered the medium-term financial strategy in November, we were aware of the financial issues that we faced in the medium term. Since then, Cabinet and Overview Scrutiny have considered some proposals in relation to the new waste and street cleansing contract. That was to look at ways to try and limit as much as we could the cost increases we could face from May 25. And we're now moving into the final tender stage. Whilst we've seen good news in relation to the longer term income from our new leisure contract, fundamentally, we will still face the issues of funding that has not kept up with inflation. Inflation's come down, but it's still above the target level and prices are still definitely rising. We and local government overall face huge problems with recruitment and retention, and part of that comes down to pay. And I think we should expect a pay claim for 24-25 that starts off above our 4% estimate. Now, we don't begrudge our staff a decent wage, but we do also know that each extra 1% over that 4% costs the council around £150,000. We've tried to limit how much of these inflationary increases we pass on to residents in fees and charges. We feel that it's the right thing to do, but it is a further strain on our budget. As announced in last year's budget statement, there will be no increase in garden waste charge this April as part of that 18-month deal we offered to residents. Appendix D to the budget report is our Section 151 Officers Section 25 report, which provides a detailed commentary on the risks and estimates contained within the budget. We obviously want to have a budget that aligns with our priorities. We'll be setting our updated council delivery plan at Cabinet next month. We announced just yesterday the exciting news that we've been awarded £7.7 million of funding from the public sector decarbonisation scheme. And with a contribution from our capital funds, it would help us to deliver the decarbonisation of our leisure centres, helping us to deliver against our climate objectives, as well as providing some financial savings too. We're also continuing to look into whether there's a viable business case for a new learner pool at the Royston Leisure Centre, in addition to the already planned gym extension. At Cabinet, we considered the resource implications of delivering these projects and added extra staffing in the resource to the budget to support the delivery of these projects. And this can be funded through the late extra money that we received from government. Appendix D sets out in more detail where we've tried to make some sensible staff investments for the future, including the local plan review, town centre strategies, specialist planning advice on landscaping, ecologies and trees, introduction of a graduate training scheme. These were shared at the budget workshops and I believe were accepted by members. I'm going to move to an additional amendment that I'd like to move tonight in respect of B corridors. And as a Barnet and fan and a B fan, and I hope this will be welcome to the council here. A one-off expenditure in 24-25 will allow us to complete and implement B corridors across all our towns. This will cost an additional £10,000 in 24-25. I hope this will be welcomed, and my colleague, Councillor Steve Jarvis, will provide a little more detail later. And in addition, I sat through the County Council budget meeting 2 weeks ago. Sadly, the Conservative-controlled council agreed a 50% cut to member locality budgets, despite opposition from Labour and Liberal Democrats. These budgets help so many of our local organisations. In response, I'm proposing a one-off increase to area forum grant budgets of £25,000 in 24-25. Each area forum will receive an additional grant for 1 year of £5,000. This will help especially with some smaller grants and help manage the transition to reduce funding from the County Council. And I hope colleagues here will agree that unanimously. Before I move the recommendations and ask you to approve this budget, I just need to take you briefly through a couple of areas of the report. Paragraph 5.2 refers to the statutory requirement to consult business ratepayers. I confirm we've not had any further feedback. Paragraph 7.3 and 8.4 detail the changes made to the budget since it was considered by Cabinet. The biggest impact is the expected improvement in energy rates for leisure centres. This is welcome news. Paragraph 8.19 to 8.21 details how the recommended minimum general fund balance is calculated. The specific risks summarised in paragraph 8.19 and detailed in Appendix A are reviewed each year to ensure that they reflect the most significant offence that could affect the financial position of the council. This includes a challenge of the probabilities and impacts, as well as a cross-check against the risk register. Chair, this Labour and Liberal Democrat joint administration has achieved collectively a huge amount for residents since 2019 in the face, as I say, of the pandemic and cost of living crisis. But there is much more to do following the May elections. This budget sets out our path forward. Overall, we're in a similar position as when we set out the medium-term strategy back in November. We're facing the prospect of needing to find £2.7 million of annual savings or additional income within the next 5 years, with some uncertainty as to whether that might be higher or lower. We have the resources to cope with either eventuality. So mentioned at the start, the prudent use of our reserves allows us to wait for more certainty over future waste costs and to hopefully get past the worst impacts of the cost of living crisis. It will give us more time until we have greater certainty over future funding, but there are no guarantees on this. But we do still need to be ready to take the difficult decisions when the time comes. We can't pretend, members, that the level of savings will come from efficiencies. We've faced too many years of real terms funding cuts for that to be realistic. Neither can we expect significant new income streams. We've seen what's happened in other local authorities with risky investments. We were right to be cautious in our approach. But we're ready to make those decisions, and we will consider and consult with our residents on their needs and priorities in making those decisions. This joint administration has put this council and residents and businesses that we serve in a good place to meet the challenges of the next 4 years. I commend the budget to the council. Chair, I'd like to move recommendations 2.1 to 2.3 contained within the report. As amended by my earlier announcements, I move amended recommendations 2.4 and 2.5, which should now read: Recommendation 2.4 will become that we approve the revenue savings and investments as detailed in Appendix B, with the additional investments in 24-25 only of the 25,000 for Area 4 and grants and 10,000 for additional B corridors. And recommendation 2.5 will become approves a net expenditure of 19.933 million as detailed in Appendix C, adjusted to reflect the additional investments in 24-25, totaling 35,000. Chair, I move this Labour and Liberal Democrat joint administration budget. Thank you.
Point of order. Okay, what is your point of order, Councillor Munser?
On recommendation 2.5, we've now been given 3 different figures. There's one of which is from the Cabinet referral on the 6th of February. There's one of which was contained and published within the reports tonight, and now there's one of which Councillor Albert is saying to us. I was just wondering where is the which one is the correct one, and why has there
Where's
been
the point of order, Councillor Munser? That's a question.
Well, forgive me, in that case, I'll ask the question.
Well, if you could wait for the questions, that would be appreciated. Do we have any questions for Councillor Albert? Councillor Munser.
Thank you very much. And this is indeed the right moment for me to ask this question. So as I said to Council just a moment ago, on the Cabinet referral on the 6th of February, it was recommended that to Council that we approve a net expenditure of a budget of £20.365 million. On the published agenda items, we're told that, or recommended that we approve a net expenditure of £19.898 million. And now we're being told to approve a budget of £19.933 million. Can I ask Councillor Albert why the change?
Councillor Albert.
It's to reflect the changes we've talked about this evening, including the additional 35,000 for the B corridor. And Mr. Cooper might want to add any further information to that.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. The change between the Cabinet version, the initial Council version was the change for the energy costs in leisure centres, and as Councillor Albert already answered, the additional 35k between the original Council version and this one is the additional £35,000 just announced.
Thank you very much for answering the question. I don't see any further questions. The recommendation is that the Council 2.1 notes the position on the collection fund and how it will be funded. 2.2 notes the position relating to the general fund balance and that due to the risks identified, a minimum balance of 2.46 million is recommended. 2.3 notes the net revenue savings that are likely to be required in future years combined with the Chief Finance Officer's Section 25 report, can be found at Appendix D, which provides a commentary on the risks and reliability of estimates contained in the budget. 2.4 approves the revenue savings and investments as detailed in Appendix B, with the amendment, the additional investment in 24-25 only of 25k for area forum grants and £10,000 for additional B corridors. 2.5 approves a net expenditure budget of 19.933 million as detailed in Appendix C, adjusted to reflect the additional investments in 24-25 totaling £35,000. 2.6 approves a council tax increase of 2.99%, which is in line with the provisions in the medium-term financial strategy. I have had the proposal from Councillor Albert. May I have a seconder? Councillor Barnes.
Happy to second, Chair, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. We will now move on to the debate. Councillor Hone.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Albert, for your very detailed explanation of what the budget is. We do appreciate it. I have given a list of what my poses are to certain members of the administration and to certainly also to Ian Cooper as well. So if I could just ask some poses here that perhaps need clarification, not in terms of questions, but some thoughts around perhaps what we might think about doing something differently. So I'll start with the revenue budget. Page 8, the council has capacity to deliver in medium-term budget, balanced budget, but there would be a need to act and make difficult decisions. And Appendix C shows 2.7 million further savings to be advised over a 4-year period, with none in 2024-25. This includes, and I quote, being able to generate additional income, generate income from commercial activities, reduce the level of services that we provide. So, do we have any idea, an idea like headcount reduction or in certain places? See financial risk register on page 47. Non-replacement of leavers, reduction in administration of pet projects like perhaps name change. So that's my first comment. Chair, would you like me to go through the others? One at a time? What's your preference, Chair?
My preference would actually be, if it's okay, to go through them one at a time. And have the response. I think that would be an easier way for people to follow it. So if that's okay with you, Councillor Albert, wonderful. Could I have a response, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Home, for those questions and sight. I think the important thing, and I think this, I hope they'll be accepted by members here, is that clearly this, I think the council, in terms of actually meeting the challenge that's in front of us, obviously we need to look at anything and everything. And that is what we have begun to do. But I don't think, and I think it's too speculative at this stage to sort of set out specific sort of target areas. We don't want to set unnecessary hairs running. But I think it is important that clearly we need to look root and branch at all our activities, all the things that we do, to see where if any we can do better, where we can indeed actually do less or not at all in the future. But I think it is important at this stage is certainly not to set out specific target areas, other than we need to look at really at a whole range of things, and that's what we've certainly begun to do. And I think any administration that it takes office after May will need to carry on with that task that we've already begun to put in place.
Thank you very much. Your next point, Councillor Home.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, there's other places which he mentioned where, of course, they have announced those sorts of things where they're trying to save money. He was there in County Hall. The council tax table 1 assumes a 1.99% increase in the rate, net 0.5% increase in tax base. That seems low. Is this due to council tax reduction scheme?
No, not specifically. This is the 1.99 is because what we expect government will impose as a maximum increase. And in terms of that 0.5, so we believe that increase is a prudent assumption.
Thank you, Councillor Hone.
Thank you. That seems quite low, 0.5%. Syrian Refugee Project Table 4, the costs incurred are less than grants awarded by £700,000, which is a lot. What are the plans for these funds?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I looked at this, and I believe there may be some misunderstanding there. The table headings in there are estimated balances at different points, but are looking to use that money slowly as per the text in the table.
Thank you.
Of course, there are also many unknown items in there, and when it comes to reserve in 2025, which is interesting, unknown. I'll go on to Caroline on table 7. Can we please confirm that there are no costs to this council? But I see there are capital spends in R1, so doesn't that incur some perhaps loss of interest, and therefore there is a cost to us of Caroline, or is this net?
Well, again, and I did have a look at that, and again, obviously, thanks for the sight of the question. It's really helpful. But R1 that you referred to is not a capital. It's actually a revenue investment. So the impact in table 7 of cost reduction is greater than the revenue investment. Careline income covers the direct costs. However, I think it's absolutely right to say that we do need to keep under review whether to ensure that it also covers all our overheads as well. But as I say, the R1 is not a capital but a revenue investment.
Perhaps I saw that there are capital spends in R1 for Caroline, but I won't argue. 8.2.8, I say the level of savings is expected to increase significantly when the costs of the new waste and street cleansing contract are known. I'll repeat that. The level of savings are expected to increase significantly when the cost of the new waste and street cleansing contract are known. I find this surprising when all we hear is that costs are increasing beyond estimates and the risk register shows a £250 exposure. Or is it due to reduction in services being proposed, like bin collections, leaf clearance, street bin numbers, empty street cleaning? Perhaps we're planning to pay to lease all the vehicles, over £8 million I see in there. So Interestingly, we say the level of savings is expected to increase, savings increase, but looks like the service is going down.
I'm sorry, Councillor Hone, I can't actually see that as a question. That's more of a
Okay,
statement. So if you'd like to move on to the next question.
I'll take it as a question. Can you confirm that he is not surprised and that he is content that the level of savings is expected to increase significantly?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm content. I mean, I think it perhaps just to sort of clarify the wording there, that and certainly what the wording is meant to achieve, if it perhaps doesn't entirely reflect it, it is that is our need to make more savings that will increase. So that I think is what that 8.28 refers to.
Thank you, Councillor Albert, and thank you, Councillor Chair. I won't come on to capital because that'll be when we do the investment strategy, capital and treasury item on the agenda, Chair. So I have answers to the questions which I hope the rest of the members here and the public have listened to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just a little point of information. In the introduction there, Councillor Albert mentioned getting the museum working. It did actually open in June 2018 under a Conservative administration, albeit not fully, with the aid of a £1 million National Lottery Heritage Grant. So only formally opened its front doors in July 2019. But the museum and the town hall, which is the best part of the facility, actually, I believe, did actually open in 2018. The other bit I want to come up on is that some of the breaking news bits, the new bits we heard tonight. First of all is the public sector decarbonisation scheme, of which we've been awarded £7.7 million. So in a way, the question is that for a specific project. You do mention in there about the leisure centres, but could it be put to something else, such as the Solar Together scheme that we're considering at the moment, which involves the council paying for solar panels on commercial buildings and then taking the excess revenue from power generation. I do have another one, but if you want to come back on that one first, but I do have another point on that.
Again, during this debate, I think it's important to go question by question.
The project specifically aimed around our leisure centres, but I know Councillor Jarvis would like to cover a little bit that in a little bit more detail.
I'm happy for Councillor Jarvis to answer the question. Yeah.
Yeah, the bid was made for some specific decarbonisation projects on the leisure centres, and the reason that the leisure centres have been chosen is because they meet the public sector decarbonisation bid requirements at the moment. And there is a plan as to what it is intended to do with that. There may be further bids in the future for other buildings that the council own, but it's important that we make bids, firstly, that we are prepared for, and secondly, where the existing equipment and the existing state of the building means that our chances of success are reasonable. And that is why we bid for the leisure centres, because we were able to make a conformant bid there, which is why we've been so successful.
I think I'm just going to quickly mention there, Councillor Levitt, thanks to the officers for getting those grants sorted very quickly. It is appreciated, because I know it is already part of their job, but it's the job done exceptionally well. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the explanation, Councillor Jarvis. I just want a little bit of clarification on that, but it's nice to see, and as echo your thoughts, Chairman, in that the Chair, in that it's good work by the officers in getting that. The other one I wanted to bring up was the extra £5,000 for area forums for grants. Currently in Letchworth area, and I believe in some of the other area forums, we are carrying over funding into next year because we've not been able to spend it all. I think, in fact, Royston's the only one that's got £1 left, I think, in their budget. Everybody else has got money to carry forward at the moment. It has been suggested at Letchworth Area Forum last night, this could be due to the complexity and time restraints involved in the grant application process. And it's great to have that extra money, but please can ask that we do look at reviewing that grant process so we can get that money out into the community where it's needed as quickly and as expediently as possible.
Councillor Willoughby, would you like to respond to that?
Absolutely. Obviously, our preference is that we spend all the money, we give out all the money to organisations. I'm not saying that councillors don't do outreach, and I think they do an absolutely fantastic job at reaching out to local organisations. I think my predecessor in this post made it very spoke of those who are hard to ignore and those who are who we don't who we don't necessarily reach out to. I think there are probably quite a lot of organisations, and in fact, I was just at a lunch today, who are saying that they don't know about some of our grants. So while we are in a position where we haven't given out all of our grants, there are organisations that also would like to. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to reach out more and do more there. I think we do great jobs, but I think we need to do a bit more to reach out to those. The additional grant pot, which Councillor Albert has announced today, is yet to be fully realised, as you would expect. But the hope is to do some smaller grants and help out more people in a smaller way, so that they can do greater things. I hope that helps answer.
Councillor Willoughby, can I just take chair's prerogative for a moment? Is there a way that we're looking to speed up the process?
That is something that we are going to review our grants process, and we hope to speed up our, the process. Obviously, working with Office of Resource as it is, the hope is there. We'll see what we realise when we work together to do that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Just on that note, Chair, Councillor Willoughby, it might be prudent, and I wonder if you'd look into this, but maybe using those grants that you're trying to get to a very small level of charity, very localised, to save the council a little bit of money. Maybe we could delegate that money to some of the town and parish councils, so we wouldn't be using our time and cost to deliver that. And actually, they are probably far more visible in those local communities with those small charities.
You're welcome to come back on that.
Yeah, we want to work with all of our partner organisations. That's including town and parish councils, the CVS, which is obviously the voluntary service, and things like the Heritage Foundation. We want to be able to find out where these different organisations need money and what they can do with it, and we're willing to work with anyone that will help us find out how we can do that better.
Thank you. Right, I don't have any further debate. Councillor Albert, would you? Oh, there we go. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to say that I believe this budget invests in our council priorities. It puts people first, and it's our council priorities of people first, sustainability and a brighter future. And in the planning and transport area, we're making a net investment of approximately 100,000, despite the current budget pressures that we've heard all about this evening already. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we are investing in. So we welcome the additional income from planning fees, which are actually long overdue, which have come from the government recently, which are going to raise an additional 175,000. And then we are investing in our local plan update. So as you know, we reviewed the policies as we were required to in starting last year. And there is a need for a full update, and we need additional resources to provide evidence for that update and early community engagement on it. We're also investing in staffing because we need to build capacity and resilience in the team following the adoption of the local plan. Lots of major sites coming forward. And we are also investing in in-house specialists, an ecologist and a tree officer to help with landscaping of our developments that are coming forward. On Luton Airport, we've put another 20,000 into this budget to monitor and enforce following the inspector's report. So the examination is now closed and the inspector is preparing their report. There is something called the green control growth, which will need to be monitored, and that 20,000 will help us to do that. And then the Hitchin station access, which I know is of interest to Hitchin residents and councillors. We have put aside another 20,000 to work with Herts-CC in looking at options to improve the east-west links across Hitchin, including the station access, but widening accessibility for pedestrians and cycles as well. So we are investing additional resources despite the funding pressures to ensure that development meets the highest levels of sustainability as we are in a climate and ecological emergency, and that these are progressed in good time, that they provide the much needed additional housing that we require in this district, including 40% affordable. And I just want to finish with saying our motto is Memoris Acti Prudentis Futuri, mindful of what has been done and aware of what will be. This is a prudent budget which protects and enhances what our residents value most and recognises the climate and ecological emergency we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Muncer.
Thank you, Chair. The budget before us this evening is a budget brought forward not by an administration that is strong and decisive, but it's brought forward by an administration of which seeks to shy away from taking the tough and decisive decisions of which are needed in order to put this council's finances on a firm footing for the future. And why is that? Why are we deferring and delaying decisions regarding the future? Well, of course, it's because there's an election. And Councillor Albert and the Labour Party want to come back in after May as an administration. They want to drop their Liberal Democrat colleagues and they want to be a full Labour administration. And we've seen a split this evening in the administration tonight on the motion on a 4-day week. And yet again, we have a budget speech by Councillor Albert, backed up by Labour members, of which seeks to blame the government. That seems to be all this administration can do. Well, it's not our fault. It's the government's fault. Now, Sajid Javid notably said, I think it was in 2019, so many chancellors ago, that austerity is over. And austerity is, of course, over because we're seeing this government, and I'm proud of the investment that this government is making in North Hertfordshire. We've seen in recent weeks £76 million allocated by this government to the local authorities of which govern North Hertfordshire. And we've seen just a day ago, nearly £8 million from a government scheme in order to support our public buildings, our council buildings from going net zero. And Councillor Albert has argued that there are no cuts in this budget and this administration is not cutting anything at all. Well, I wish you would tell our residents that, because that's certainly not what I'm hearing on the doorstep. Because come May 2025, our residents will be faced with a worse waste collection service. They will see their bin collections cut to once every 3 weeks. They will see more fly tipping on the streets. They will see more litter on in our town centres. That's not the North Hertfordshire we want to portray to our residents. And that's all under this Labour and Liberal Democrat administration, because you're paying more and you're getting less for your money. Well,
excuse me, we will not have that. I will not accept it from any side of this chamber. Thank you, and I apologise for the interruption, Councillor Muncer.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I do note that last year the administration copied that phrase, and what is it they say? That intimidation is in best form of flattery or something. Imitation, forgive me, is the greatest form of flattery. But we're told as well that, Hertfordshire County Council have increased their precept. Well, yes, they may have done, but they provide far more services than this authority provides. And then we're talking about savings, because last month, forgive me, I recommended a £134 saving that this council could make by scrapping home internet for our staff. And yet that was rejected by Councillor Albert completely. I voted against proudly with my Conservative colleagues to freeze council allowances. That's a £34,000 saving that could have been made and diverted into funding frontline services. But no, we are seeing politics put above the people. And then we talk about staffing, because there is a chronic underfunding of staffing in this authority. We're seeing statutory departments of which are understaffed chronically, and we spent last year nearly £1 million on agency staff. That is something which we really do need to see a strategy brought forward to tackle with, because that is unsustainable. And Councillor Albert liked to talk about a cautious approach of which is being taken by this administration to investment. Well, what is cautious, forgive me, about purchasing a shopping centre for millions of pounds of taxpayers' money without a clear financial plan? We've had this shopping centre in our possession for about 2 years for the cost of about £4 million, and yet we have no financial plan as to how we're going to pay for any of the regeneration of which might be proposed, because yet again, like a Labour government, they would cost taxpayers more money. They would borrow more in order to fund unsustainable projects. So Labour and the Lib Dems have no clear plan. They're not willing to take the necessary and decisive decisions of which are necessary in order to put this council on a firm footing. And I would like to see in May 2024, the Conservatives getting back into power and putting this administration on a better course.
Very nearly 5 minutes on the nose. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. As Deputy Member for Finance and IT, of course, I welcome the budget. In particular, I'd like to thank the two Ians for their very professional work on it, and everyone else behind the scenes as well. Just touching on the Aero Forum grants, I see the late addition to those by £5,000 each as vital. As has been mentioned, in the Royston area, we've already used all the available budget and with a meeting to spare. So there's definitely demand for more. We must continue to support our local voluntary organisations, which do so much good work in the face of, frankly, unnecessary and short-sighted cuts in the county locality budgets. And it also shows, I think, the agility of the joint administration to respond to adverse events and to continue to protect the interests of our communities. In contrast to Councillor Munster's characterisation just then, I think it's fantastic to see the very positive proposals in this budget, particularly at Royston Leisure Centre, and the investment in much needed gym facilities and the revenue benefit that will have, decarbonisation that's been talked about, and the possibility of the future learner pool. So I want to applaud Councillor Jarvis and his team, the team that works with him, for the excellent work on those as well. I think as well as being good for the financial sustainability of the council, as shown in the papers, and the many health benefits that it will bring to the local community, these investments demonstrate that despite what some people say, this administration is delivering for the people of Royston and for people all across the district. Thank you.
Councillor Dennis.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to thank Councillor Munster for his very impassioned speech. However, I do have some concerns and some questions that perhaps Councillor Munster might be able to help me with outside of this meeting. The main one is, if this administration is shying away from taking tough decisions and deferring those decisions, and if in fact there really are necessary and decisive decisions that we must take in order to secure the financial sustainability of this council, what would you have us cut? Would it perhaps be the leisure contract and the benefits that that provides to our residents in terms of their health, and the investment to save other parts of the public sector? Perhaps Councillor Munster might also wish us to reduce staff. I mean, he has, although, referenced that we have serious staffing issues and we need to further support that. So that would be additional money, wouldn't it, in order to support the staff that we desperately need. I also note that Councillor Munster, now the champion of the people that work for this authority, did in fact propose a motion this evening that potentially runs contrary to the things that staff might want and that might assist with recruitment and retention. So it's an interesting double face that we're wearing tonight, isn't it? However, I think that it's critical to note that austerity isn't over. It's been rebranded as a cost of living crisis, and central government has year on year cut the funding to not just this authority, but the majority of councils across the country. And in fact, that's why we're seeing unitary authorities and county councils issue more Section 114 notices. They are desperate cries for help. They are local government saying to central government, we are struggling. We cannot cope. We cannot balance our budget for the next year. And I think it is actually much to the commendation of the officers of this authority and the prudent management of Councillor Albert over years, and the assistance that he's received from a number of Liberal Democrat deputies, that year on year, this authority has managed to return a balanced budget, and we are able to identify and apportion savings that need to be made over the coming years in order to make sure that we continue to meet our financial commitments. When we look at our budgets, we do not take the approach that Councillor Munster seems to advocate, that we must cut and slash to the bone and only provide statutory services. What we do is look at the value that this council provides to the residents that we serve. We look at the way in which this authority is able to enhance the lives of all the people that live within this area. And we find ways to support creative decision making, and we find additional funding to support what our residents tell us matters the most. Indeed, Councillor Munster will be aware of the resident survey that was carried out and the feedback that this authority received. Were we to take the approach advocated perhaps of reducing what we provide in order to arrive at goodness knows what situation, I don't think that our residents would be too happy with us. In fact, they would continue to have to pay more, and they would get even less under Councillor Munster's proposed approach. So, colleagues, I think that in a very difficult situation, in an increasingly challenging financial landscape for local government, our officers have done a great job in working with this administration to provide a balanced budget. And I note that once again, the opposition has not proposed an alternate budget. If indeed colleagues on the opposite side of this chamber would take a different approach and would do something different to what this administration has proposed, I think we would all welcome sight of that. But once again, we haven't had that. We do not know what the Conservatives would do were they in this position. However, Councillor Munster has perhaps given us a glimpse of the future. And I must say, colleagues, I don't think that it looks too rosy.
Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Chair. When I indicated I was going to speak, I was going to take up Councillor Albert's suggestions I should say more about B corridors, but I think there's a couple of other things I want to cover first. I'm really quite impressed that an hour ago, or maybe a little more, Councillor Munster was an advocate of keeping the staff's nose pressed fairly on the grindstone, and now he's transformed and is worried about the amount of work they have to do. And I'm tempted to speak for a long time, because if we keep this budget debate going on long enough, perhaps Councillor Munster will have decided that this budget is actually a good thing. I'm also interested by his grasp of finances in general, in that he told us an hour ago that something would cost 3 million, which we were subsequently told might result in a substantial income of 500,000. And then we're told that the government has given councils in North Hertfordshire 76 million. Well, I think the government provided North Herts with about 135k, and the county council with 9.6 million, which doesn't quite add up to 76 million, does it? However, back to the question of the B corridors. Our grounds maintenance contractor, John O'Connor, had the innovative idea that they would promote the idea of a B corridor in Letchworth, essentially working with people with gardens along a corridor through Letchworth to encourage them to plant more bee-friendly plants. And then John O'Connor would fill in the gaps in the public realm where that was necessary to complete the corridor. And some of us spent a pleasant afternoon last summer knocking on the doors of people with bee-friendly gardens to encourage them to make them more bee-friendly. And one of the things that people in other parts of the district raised was, could we not do that elsewhere? And that's exactly what we propose to do. So this is a question of working with residents, helping them to make their gardens more bee-friendly, more friendly for pollinators, and filling in those bits of the public realm. So it's something that for a very modest amount of money, we can produce a real environmental improvement. So that, I hope, is something that we can all agree.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. If I understand it correctly, the area forum grants, other than Royston, were not all spent, yet we're planning to increase the grant budgets by £5,000. Just a point, don't really understand it. I think Councillor Munster had a point, actually. It does sound a little bit like electioneering. Just moving on, the financial problems of this council are always somebody else's fault. I realise that personal responsibility is unpopular, but we cannot expect central government of whatever colour to endlessly bail out councils that are not able to manage their own affairs and should be able to take responsibility for their own actions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to commend Councillor Albert and Councillor Bonds for this budget. It's excellent, it's realistic, it's balanced, which is always good. But what it does do is it recognises the economic reality that faces this country, this authority, and most importantly, our residents. And that is important because when I hear comments like austerity is over, I despair. A more cloth-eared, out of touch, and frankly elitist comment I don't think I've heard in this room. And if people would like to come and discuss with the people that I represent on this council that the thought that austerity is over, well, you're welcome to, because I don't want to go and say that to them. But it does explain one thing to me, because I now understand why the ideology behind Liz Truss's premiership comes from.
Councillor Plater.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief in just to say that I agree with the comments made by Councillor Mason. I think this is a very well balanced and prudent budget. But I also like to point out on the issue of personal responsibility that if we were to put ourselves in a position, if we were to put our residents in a position where we said to them we were going to add 30% to their cost and demand pressures next year, and in return we were going to take away 30% of their income, I can't imagine they'd be too happy about it. And this is what's happening to councils across the UK, is that 29% of cost and demand pressures will go up, totaling £15 billion. And there is a 27% real terms cut in core spending power since 2010, which leaves a funding gap of about £4 billion for councils over the next 2 years. So really, we are balancing the budget here year on year in more and more challenging circumstances. And if the government doesn't want to see councils go into bankruptcy and issue Section 114 notices, of which 1 in 5 councils across the UK are in danger of doing, then, as the LGA says, councils need certainty, more clarity on financial reform, and the government needs to come up with a long-term plan that will help both this council and councils across the UK to balance their budget. As is, we are balancing our budget. It's a fantastic budget, and I commend the work done by Councillor Albert, Councillor Barnes, and the officers on this budget, and I will happily be voting for it. Thank you.
Councillor Willoughby.
Thank you, Chair. I echo the points that Councillor Plater made. I mean, if it was all our fault, as is possibly being put forward here, why are so many councils across the country struggling? It obviously can't be all our fault. There has to be. And I think things have got so much worse. And I'm so tired of this concentration on statutory services, which are incredibly important. But you know what else is important? Having a nice place to live, which comes from non-statutory services. It's the additional things. It's like, you know, having art in our communities, having culture. It's all of those things that actually make it worth living here and worth living at all. If we were just to worry about the bins being emptied and nothing else, wouldn't this be a terrible place to live?
Councillor Prendergast.
I'm not sure I can follow up on that. So as you can understand, my passion is housing and preventing homelessness. And in that respect, this budget puts people first. This will ensure that we can provide housing advice and homelessness support, and including temporary accommodation needs. In addition, this budget means we can increase our staffing levels, which we continue to prevent homelessness. And under this government, that has increased significantly, tenfold. It's appalling. And despite these challenges, we have, and I'm proud to say under this administration, been able to support numerous people at the risk of homelessness into supported accommodation that meets their needs. This highlights the importance of having adequate reserves in this area, particularly as these challenges will almost certainly continue as the cost of living crisis deepens. Thankfully, as opposed to this government, this administration continues to show unwavering support for those most vulnerable in our community. And thank you so much for this budget.
We're now going to move on to the vote. We're voting on the recommendation as previously read 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 with the amendment of the additional investment in 24-25 only of 25k. Ian, you are welcome to have your response. Your but I didn't give you extended time for this bit.
No, certainly not. And I will be brief. I mean, answer to Councillor Morris is like all, and I believe all local authorities of, I think across the country, what they're asking for, they're not expecting big favours for government. What we are expecting is government to give us a long-term financial settlement so that we can actually plan properly. Like you would plan in your business, we need to plan in our council. That is what we need. What we need over and above everything. Yes, we'd like more funding, but give us that long-term financial settlement. That will actually make the difference. To my memory, Councillor Munton, we didn't vote on home internet expenses. As I told you, you only asked me a question. You don't necessarily vote on questions. You didn't get the vote on that particular one. And as you know, it was a conflation of an entirely different issue about whether you can, where we do not pay home internet expenses. The only thing we do pay is a working home allowance, which is something quite different. And I answered that the previous time. In terms of councillor allowances, there is certainly at least one Conservative in this chamber who maybe didn't necessarily support a freeze because they voted in a different way at the county council meeting. And I'm actually really sad that we get into this sterile debate about councillor allowances. At the county council, it was really welcome to see cross-party that actually, thank goodness that we actually accepted the recommendation of the independent panel. And it's just really such a shame, Councillor Munster, that we can't do that here, because that actually, in fairness to the county council, the Conservative controlled county council, that is a proper and decent way to do business. And I hope one day you would perhaps learn that point. Now, I recognise that the Taxpayers Alliance North Herts branch have been in full session this evening. But what I would say is that this administration has continued to tax fairly and spend wisely. That is what we will continue to do, and I hope that we will continue to do that post-May. Sadly, and as you said, intimidation is the sincerest form of flattery. I'm not sure. But even if you meant imitation is, let me try one bit of imitation here is, what I do know is that actually that the Conservatives have no plan because they haven't put out one this evening. What I do know is that we will, as a joint administration, stick to our plan. And what I also know is that the Conservatives, if they were elected in May, will take us back to square one. You might have heard that from someone else. I agree with it, but I'm referring to this Conservative councillors and what a Conservative administration would look like. I move, and I hope everyone will support this budget.
Thank you. We will now move on to the vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. I now propose that we take a comfort break.
I would ask that we return to the chamber at 10 o'clock, please. A 10-minute comfort break. All right, if we can all take our seats, we are just about to go back online. I think I've got 2 councillors left to rejoin. I can tip you the wink now. Good evening. We will resume the meeting and we'll go into item number 10. This is the investment strategy, integrated capital and treasury. Referral from Cabinet. Can I invite the Leader of the Council, Councillor Elizabeth Dennis, to present the referral?
Thank you very much, Chair. In the interests of brevity, members will see the papers before them. They'll note the comments there. I will pass over to Councillor Albert to present.
I do have to offer them questions.
Oh, okay. I'll take any questions.
Oh, which there are none. We'll pass over to Councillor Albert.
Tempted to move formally, but I'm not going to, Chair. And I'll try and be fairly brief on this one. The investment strategy combines our capital budgets for 24-25 onwards with our treasury strategy. As our capital spend is not directly matched by funding, the amount we spend on capital has a direct impact on the cash that we have available to invest. Now, whilst any changes in the level of our reserves from our revenue budget also has an impact, impact is much less significant. For a long time, we've been able to rely on our capital receipts, especially from the sale of our housing stock, to fund our capital programme. But it's likely during the coming year that we're forecasting that those receipts will have been used up and we will need to fund our capital spend from borrowing. In medium term, that capital spend will be funded from internal borrowing. Now, what this means is that we use the cash that we hold from our reserves to fund the capital spend rather than borrowing externally. That means we aren't paying external interest, we just get less income from investing our surplus cash. We can switch to borrowing externally whenever it suits us, and that is likely to be when interest rates are rather lower than their current levels. Now, whether we borrow internally or externally, we're still required to make a minimum revenue provision charge against our revenue budget. That charge spreads the cost of the capital spend over the life of the asset. This increased revenue costs from the capital spend mean that it's really important that we continue review whether our capital spend is providing good value for money. You note that we've added quite a lot of capital spend this year, and for good reason. Paragraph 5.2 sets out the changes that were discussed and agreed at Cabinet and in front of you tonight. Some of that is spent in investment that we expect to generate revenue savings, such as the news about our successful public sector decarbonisation scheme bid, which will reduce our carbon emissions. And we also expect it to provide energy cost savings that at least offset the revenue cost of that capital spend. We've already established that there is a case for investing in additional gym capacity at the Royston Leisure Centre, and we also hope to have a viable business case for a learner pool at Royston as well. And indeed, by providing capital funding for investments in our leisure centres, we will see significant increases in the management fee income that we receive. Appendix A1 at the back of the document sets out our detailed capital programme. This joint administration takes great pride that we've been able to continue our programme of playground renovation and upgrades to skate parks like in Hitchin and Royston. A smaller capital investment where we are looking to improve what we provide to our residents, whilst also generating some income, is for upgrading the kiosk at Howard Park in Letchworth. Alongside the upgrade, we will also start to run the facility ourselves, like we do at the kiosk at Bancroft in Hitchin, to maximise the amount of time that the kiosk can be open this year. So, Chair, I'd like to add a recommendation to the report, which would read recommendation 2.3, which would read, agrees to bring forward the 30,000 capital allocation for the refurbishment of the Howard Park kiosk into 23-24. In addition, I'm asking the council to agree that we bring forward into 23-24 10,000 of the public sector decarbonisation scheme capital budget. This will enable initial detailed feasibility and programming work to start before the 1st of April 24. Given the significant carbon and energy savings the project will bring, we're keen to get that project moving as soon as possible. So therefore, Chair, I'm proposing we add a further recommendation to the report that would read 2.4, agrees to bring forward into 23-24 10,000 of the public sector decarbonisation scheme capital budget. This will enable work to start before the 1st of April 2024. As I mentioned at the start of this report, also covers how we invest our surplus cash. Our approach to investment prioritises security, the risk of not getting our money back, and liquidity, getting the money back when we need it, ahead of the yield on those investments. The only change to our approach reflects that we are budgeting for a large change in balances over the year, so limits will be based on the average balance rather than the closing balance. But to help ensure an even spread of investments, we have reduced some of the percentage limits. Finally, paragraph 8.10 to 8.16 asks the council to approve the adoption of the Treasury Management Policy Statement, which is the same as in previous years. So therefore, Chair, I'd like to move recommendations 2.1 on the investment strategy, 2.2 on the code of practice on treasury management as set out in the paper. And as I covered previously, I'd like to move those two additional recommendations, 2.3 on Howard Park and 2.4 on the PSDS capital budget. Move the investment strategy, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Albert? Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Very good news to hear about the decarbonisation fund that this council has been successful in. And I do notice in a lot of the capital spend, there's boiler replacements to the leisure centres. Now, I'm assuming that now that we have this new fund, and if we're going decarbonisation, what will be happening to those boilers? Because I wouldn't have thought we would want to be replacing old gas boilers. I think that's what they are. Perhaps you could update me on how we're going to be able to use the decarbonisation fund in that expenditure.
Councillor Albert.
I mean, again, obviously, I might made some additional advice from Mr. Cooper or Councillor Jarvis, but I mean, if you recall, Councillor Strong, the answer that Councillor Jarvis gave previously, that the public sector decarbonisation scheme was very specifically for around obviously decarbonising our leisure centres, as opposed to obviously issues around community centres. Clearly, obviously, those community centres we would obviously need to look at case by case. There are clearly, and I know when we've looked at this in the past, that there are a number of, for example, of community centres where, for example, a heat pump would just not be appropriate for that particular building. But entirely take that take that point, and obviously if either Mr. Cooper or Councillor Jarvis want to add anything further to that, more than happy they should do so.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's buried right in the detail, but on the appendix, top of page 9, it does confirm that the boiler allocations and the previous solar PV and solar thermal allocations will be added to the other bits to create our contribution towards the total cost of the public sector decarbonisation scheme fund. So yes, the boiler replacements will not happen. They'll be replaced by the heat pumps that will come through the PSDS route.
I don't see any further questions at the moment. We will be going into debate soon. Direct question, Councillor Muir?
Yes, one direct question. Mentioned heat pumps. Will it be a ground source pump or an air pump?
Mr. Cooper? No, Councillor Jarvis, my apologies.
Oh, there are air source heat pumps.
Thank you very much. Right. I don't see any further questions.
The recommendation is that this council 2.1 approves the adoption of the investment strategy as attached to Appendix A, including the capital programme and prudential indicators. 2.2 approves the adoption of the 4 clauses in relation to the Code of Practice on Treasury Management as detailed in paragraphs 8.10 to 8.16. 2.3, this is the amendments, agrees to bring forward the 30k capital allocation for the refurbishment of the Howard Park kiosk into 2023-24, and 2.4 also amended agrees to bring forward £10,000 capital allocation for the public sector decarbonisation scheme into 23-24. I've had a proposer from Councillor Albert. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Barnes.
Yes, of course. Happy to second and reserve my right to speak.
We move on to the debate. Councillor Hone.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I have a few posers which perhaps Councillor Albert might be able to illuminate on for all of the us and the onlookers. So investment strategy and capital treasury. Can I first start with a subject dear to our hearts, which is Churchgate on table 5. It says Churchgate Shopping Centre, Hitchin, ground lease value at 4.5 million, value on a fair value basis. The valuation is based on rental yields. So really, from my perspective, is this a reasonable valuation when we are seeing empty shops and the impact of working from home, etc.? Perhaps a new independent valuation, including condition, might be appropriate before we move to any further expenditure on Churchgate. Also, if I may ask on Churchgate, the forecast based on independent advice when the leasehold was acquired was that the net income would exceed the capital cost of acquiring the asset and the existing income from the freehold interest on table 4. So over what period would that be?
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, a couple of points there. I mean, I think first of all, I mean, I've seen one or two slightly erroneous leaflets floating around the Letchworth area about the Churchgate shopping centre and its value. And what I would say first of all is that I think obviously the valuation there is the current one, the correct one. However, there is an independent valuation going on as we speak. We expect the results of that hopefully by the end of March, which we'll report back to council, the finance committee, and so on. I think it's also worth saying actually that there aren't many premises or many shops empty in Churchgate at the moment, and indeed we've got several new hires, new lettings coming on, which we're hoping to announce in the next few weeks. So I see a really encouraging sort of future for Churchgate. But there is, as I say, hopefully to reassure obviously Councillor Hone that we are doing that independent valuation. There is required for the accounts, and that will obviously be available, hopefully say by the end of March. In terms of the other point, I mean, clearly the period of time we expect that income to will be until obviously final decisions are made about the regeneration. So that's the kind of period of a period that we're looking at up until any regeneration takes place.
Thank you. And thank you for that response. Yes, procrastination on that, I suppose, as nothing's happening. On the community engagement scheme, table 5, what is the £163,000 going to be spent on from community engagement schemes? Oh, you beg your pardon. I'm sorry. Would you like to repeat it, Chair? I can do that, I think. Community engagement schemes on table 5, what is the £163,000 going to be spent on?
Chair. Since obviously Councillor Home made an additional comment, I think we're right to answer that. That no, it's not procrastination. It's actually important about getting it right. We've appointed only last week some master planners and architects. Those they have begun their work and helping us to develop a vision that will be available to consult with members, with residents and businesses in Hitchin. I think that's the right way forward, and I see a really encouraging future for Churchgate. In answer to obviously your specific question around the community engagement scheme, and that's obviously you see Appendix B at the top of page 2. This comes from the Shared Prosperity Fund Community Capital Grant Scheme, and that's planned capital expenditure finance from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to provide grant funding for community capital projects in the coming year. And clearly, obviously, we'll report on those to Finance and Council about those sort of specific projects as the year goes on. But that's what it's intended for: grant funding for community capital projects.
That didn't really tell us what you're going to spend it on. You might spend it on Harkness Court. When can we see some generating income on Harkness Court on table 4?
Soon.
To some people, soon is tomorrow. Other people, perhaps over the other side, it's in 2 years, 3 years' time, like we have, or perhaps in 10 years' time, not with somewhere like John Barker Place. So soon has a different definition, perhaps, to many. Charnwood House, when can we expect to receive some income from this facility, as we are forecasting £350,000 investment this year?
I'm not going to answer soonish to that one. I think that getting Charnwood House, I think, is for all of us, not just those in Hitchin, I think is a hugely important facility. It's an opportunity to develop a community hub for the use of residents in Hitchin and beyond, right across the district. We've been hopefully looking to find either a parent organisation to take the lead on this. We're standing by with an investment which we agreed last year to help, which could be match funding to a new lead tenant who can take forward the development of this as a community hub. We've already begun to use some of that money to make sure we've got essential repairs in place to keep the building watertight. I think I would not like, and I'll be frank, I'm not sure yet when we're likely to begin to receive that income from that as a facility. And clearly, one of the questions will be, and that is, I think, will be the challenge for the authority that potentially that when that facility is let out, as to what is the level of rent that could be expected on it. It could well be, if we're looking to a community organisation, it may be at a peppercorn rent. And I think all is the pieces of work that needs doing. More than happy, obviously to keep council, and I know Councillor Hoskins is in the lead on this. I'm sure more than happy to keep council informed as we go on, and clearly, obviously, the Hitchin Area Forum as well, to ensure that actually that members are updated on the progress of actually finding a partner tenant, or indeed a different form of actually making sure that we do what we think we all want to see there, seeing Charnwood House as a viable, functioning community hub for Hitchin and the district.
Thank you.
Thank you. I suppose I move on to borrowing requirements. So you have a substantial capital borrowing requirement of 27 million, and it come from revenue reserves left by the previous administration, and also poor capital reserves which we left you. Anyway, moving on to something dearer to our hearts, which is Stevenage Leisure Limited, Table 16. The end of the contract in March 2024 is likely to affect the prospect of a loan of £308,000 being repaid. Of course, this is, of course, in addition to the significant donation we made to SLS in 2021 of excess of 2 million. So what's the latest on trying to get our £308,000 back?
I'm not sure that's something I can easily answer in public session. I'm looking to kind of for advice from Mr. Cooper as to what that, or whether he can kind of update, is able to update council on the progress on that in a public session.
We aren't able to answer that in public session. Councillor Hone, I will give you two options. Either I can arrange for you to have a direct conversation to have that answered to you, or we can look to move into part two at the end of this section of the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't need to go to part two. I think that no doubts that Ian Cooper will keep me informed and tell me the numbers anyway. So when I see him, so we'll leave it at that if we can, please. Yeah.
Appreciated.
Can I move now on to investment types, UK local authorities, Table 17, about £4 million we got there. With a number of local authorities applying for Section 114, can we confirm that we will monitor those councils to whom we have loaned substantial money and not end up in an Iceland October 2008 debacle?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, yes, I mean we can provide that assurance. This is something that we do, and the finance team do automatically anyway to ensure about all of our investments and in terms of that. But I think it would be fair to say, and this includes any of the councils that indeed have had to apply for Section 114. This has not affected the repayment of loans that they own to other local authorities. So in that sense, they haven't been actually technically bankrupt. They've still been able to repay those loans. But yes, we are of course checking about all our investments to make sure that we feel confident and they are at the appropriate level of ratings as identified in the investment strategy policy in the appendices. So yes, very happy to provide that reassurance.
Thank you. Capital investment proposals and John Barker Place I mentioned earlier. What and when can we expect any return on the planned £1.1 million planned investment? But it seems to be going on a number of years, isn't it?
Well, it has, and indeed, obviously, that was. I think it's a welcome investment, and indeed, in that sense, I'm very happy to praise the previous administration. I think they made the right choice in terms of that really important investment for the people of Westmill and Orton Ward, and it's obviously been disappointing that the Settle contractors went under, and this is and part of that program has taken rather longer. What it is going to deliver is a significant number of new and 21st century affordable housing. But my understanding is that when that commitment was made by the previous administration, it wasn't done with a formal financial return in mind. And that's certainly my position in terms of what that investment was done. It wasn't done with a financial return. But as I say, it is, and I welcome that, and I welcome what the previous administration did was help to hopefully deliver affordable houses to the residents in that particular area. So I think that I hope we would all welcome and support that. But it wasn't done with a financial return in mind.
Thank you. It's a shame we're not going to get some money back on the 1.1 million which we put in there. Finally, yes, we did not put an alternative budget together. We just gave them some questions because things are changing in a couple of 2 or 3 months' time. We don't know what it's going to be and where it's going to be. So for us to put an alternative together would just be playing around with numbers and spend more time doing that. And one last point is, it's of course, when we say we need more government spending, we need more taxpayers' money coming in. It's not just government, the money that the government give us is from the taxpayers. So please bear that in mind, that it's the taxpayers we need to money that we are going to hopefully get sometime from the government. Thank you.
No, I just don't think it's a desperately intelligent thing to say at this exact time. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Page 101, Table 5, Churchgate. It says external valuations were commissioned to support the decision to acquire the leasehold interest. The original leasehold valuation was around £2.5 million, and we ended up paying over £4.3 million without any planning consent. Whilst external valuations were indeed commissioned in an effort to support the decision, there does not appear to be any external commission document that actually commercially supports the decision to pay £4.3 million for the leasehold property. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fake.
Yes, thank you, sir. Can I refer Councillor Albert, please, to page 111 or page 21 on the back, table 14. These are the Public Works Loan Board borrowings, which date back, some of them, to 2 or 3 years after I was born, 1945, for God's sake. There is 1 or 2 there which clearly have some very high interest rates or high forecasts, 11.5%, nearly 10%. Are we able to liquidate these debts or to pay them off earlier than the termination dates, which is in this particular case 2042? And are these kept under considerations if we have got that capacities to try and take away a fairly heavy debt charge for £250,000, £28,750 a year in interest rates, which seems an awful lot to me.
We can respond to that one. Ian.
If we pay them off earlier, there'll be substantial premium to do so. So it's not economically viable to do so. So that's why debt just sits there. We do keep it under review, our Treasury advisors, but that's been the case for quite a few years, that it just has to sit there until they mature. That's the best financial sense to council.
I will make sure that that is forwarded across, and I acknowledge that was an honest error. Councillor Munser.
Thank you, Chair. Now, on the last agenda item, we were told by the administration, or there was certainly an accusation which was levelled, that the government isn't giving us enough longevity or information in order to plan for the long term. Well, might I suggest the administration get their own house in order? First of all, because this administration has made millions of pounds worth of investments of taxpayers' money, and yet we cannot be told when these investments will start to bear fruit. The best we can do, seemingly, is soon. Now, I would argue soon is not good enough. We want more detail. We want more information as to actually when we're going to see an economic return, which then can be put into funding those key statutory services. And an issue which we have at this authority currently is project management. We've seen it with the Harkness Court, of which is a classic example. It's over time and it's over budget. Any further investment strategies cannot be allowed to go that way. We need to make sure that we have policies and strategies in place to ensure that projects such as this are delivered on time and on budget. And I also note within the investment strategy, we seem to be spending an awful lot on computer software and equipment. And I'm sure that is no different to any other authority, but it seems to be quite a substantial spend. Might I suggest that if we were to have a single unitary authority for Hertfordshire, that spend would be cut?
Oh, it's very annoying when you get me like that. The comment was all we could buy an abacus, which I thought was quite apt. Well, we could buy an abacus, which was quite apt. I don't see any other comments during the debate. I am therefore going to move on, as we have a proposer in Councillor Albert, and ask him if he has anything that he would like to come back on. No, he does not. In that case, we will go to the vote on 2.1, 2.2 and the amended 2.3 and 2.4.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Item 11, the council tax resolution. As a reminder, as per the Constitution, there will be a recorded vote on this item. Ian Cooper to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Under item 8, we set our elements of the council tax in terms of our increase. This is a technical paper that needs to set the overall council tax for the district, which includes the elements from the county council and the police and crime commissioner. The recommendations in front of you are very long. That is required by statute, and it sets out the reasons for that in the report. Due to the fact that under the item 8, we did increase our level of expenditure by the 35,000 previously mentioned. That does change 2 of the recommendations. So 2.2a, the number in there increases by 35,000. Say the increase in our gross spend. That has been funded from reserve. That has an equal increase in the number in number B. So the numbers will now be 79013,921 and 64391,022. As I said, they're both £35,000 higher than they were before. The appendix guides you through the reasons for the various bits of the recommendations in the report, and therefore I'll leave you to that to sort of work out how it kind of flows through from there. But the end result is it sets the council tax for the district, including, as I said, the police and crime commissioner, Herts County Council, our council tax, and also any parish precepts.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ian? Thank you. Right. So we will look at the amendment to the recommendation 2.2a and b. Recommendation 2.1 to 2.4 as detailed at pages 137 to 141 in the agenda reports pack as amended. Can I have a proposer, Councillor Albert?
Happy, Chair, to formally move and reserve the right.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Barnes.
Happy to second, Chair, and reserve the right.
Thank you. We move on to debate. I see no debate yet. We shall move on to the vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Item 12, pay policy statement. Councillor Marsh has contacted me in advance to say that he is unable to vote on this due to a conflict of interest as part of declares. Councillor Dennis to present.
There you go. Thank you very much, Chair.
My apologies. I'm going to interrupt you, Councillor Dennis. Councillor Levitt.
Chair, if I may seek some guidance, my wife is actually employed by the council as the union chairman, sort of paid by the council, so I think I've probably got a declaration of interest there.
Well, I don't think per se, because this is just a pay policy statement, and obviously we're not dealing with awards, just a statement of the pay. So I don't believe that that is a conflict, and that's what I've advised Councillor Marsh as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies for the interruption. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you very much, Chair. So colleagues will note that the draft statement is set out and the recommendation is that we approve the draft statement at Appendix 1 and that Council delegates the authority for revisions to be made in year to the pay statement to the Service Director for Resources in conjunction with the Leader of the Council. Now, you might ask, why are we looking at a draft pay policy for the year 24-25 when we've been talking about, with certain amount of certainty, the budgets moving forward? Now, that's because this council is part of the National Joint Council for Local Government Services, which is a combined body of multiple local authorities across the country. And we agree and set the pay statements in line. Claims do take time to be resolved and the final settlements to be approved. And it's not always clear at the point that we're setting our annual budgets, of course, what the settlement and what the offer to staff will be. For example, the 23-24 settlement wasn't actually agreed by all parties until November 2023. So you can clearly see why it's important that we do have that ability to make those delegations and those alterations to the statement as we move forward. In fact, colleagues, just to sort of reference things and bring it more into focus, today we have received the Green Book claim in respect of local government services employees, and some of the things that are being requested within that ask from our staff across the country is an increase of at least £3,000 or 10%, whichever's greater, on all spinal pay column points, reviews of the gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps in local government, a 2-hour reduction in the working week with no detriment, an additional day of annual leave for personal or well-being purposes, with term time only staff also receiving a full day rather than a pro rata amount that they can use at any time, including term time, and a phased approach to reaching a minimum pay rate of £15 an hour in a maximum of 2 years sooner if possible. We did also receive the Chief Executive claim last week and had their asks come through as well. We've not yet had the Chief Officer's asks come through the NJC at this point in time. So it is clear that we do need that flexibility. We do need to have that sort of time to consider things. We are part of a national bargaining body and we will be working closely with colleagues. There is a roundtable in March where we will be discussing and looking at the claims that are coming through globally, and there'll be a lot of work with the unions. It is likely to take some time for an agreed position to be reached. But reference back to the debate on the motion earlier this evening, colleagues, and look at the things that staff across the country are asking for. The people who work in local government get the job done for us. We set the political agenda, we advocate for our residents, but it is the officers, some of whom are present here in the room this evening, some of whom are joining us virtually and giving up their time very late on a Thursday night. It is our contractors, etc., who get the job done for us, and it is incumbent on us to make sure that we are taking care of the people who ultimately do the job of caring for everybody within the area that this council serves. So, colleagues, the report is there. The draft pay statement is there. It is modelled on 23-24. You can already tell from the asks that we're receiving from staff that it is likely to be out of date. Therefore, I move the recommendation and ask that council supports us so that we can continue working via the NJC to secure as fair and viable a deal for staff as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Dennis. Just quickly, I'm sure you did mention it at the beginning, but could you just clarify for people that may not know the NJC is?
It is the National Joint Council for Local Government Services.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Councillor Dennis? And these are direct questions, not debate. Councillor Munser.
Thank you, Chair. Would I just be able to ask Councillor Dennis regarding, I know in the last meeting when we were discussing councillor allowances, we added a provision in there for councillors to be able to claim for train travel and other sort of, eco-friendly travel alternatives. Is that something of which is going to be included within this this pay policy statement, or is there already a provision for officers to be able to fulfil that somewhere else?
I think I need to refer to Mr. Cooper.
Yes, where officers are using public transport, such as trains and buses, for work purposes, they can reclaim the cost of those.
Thank you. Councillor Compton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Dennis, I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of information about how the spine points are set. I understand, and having previously worked in local authorities, how the spine system works and all the various levels, but it was mentioned earlier that our staff in particular aren't getting paid enough, which is why we're struggling to recruit so many staff. Do we have the same sort of level of spine points as councils around us, or is it set separately, and therefore those pay rises are completely different for different staff members at different councils?
Yep.
I'm going to let this one be answered by Anthony Roche.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as head of paid service, this is sort of my responsibility. The answer is those spinal points and the pay scales are North Hart specific. I think we have at various points tried to compare to how we pay versus neighbouring authorities. And that's not always straightforward, because it's not very easy to tell what a particular officer at a particular level in one council does versus that in another. Anecdotally, there is a feeling that we do underpay. And the problem with that is that whenever there is a nationally negotiated pay rise, particularly if it's a percentage pay rise, we fall further behind. So one of the things that we are discussing behind the scenes is whether we can review our pay scales, but clearly there are significant budgetary implications to that, which need to be factored in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. But I think I was going to ask a similar question, but I think Mr. Roach has just answered it in the question I was going to ask about being able to go outside the scales and look at different ways to recruit staff. So I think you've answered what I was going to ask.
Okay. So that's the end of the questions. We're now going to move on to recommendation 2.1, that Council approves the 24-25 pay policy statement attached to Appendix 1. 2.2, that Council delegates authority for revisions made in year to the pay policy statement to the Service Director. Resources in consultation with the Leader of the Council, revisions which might arise in the year, including changes in structure, changes to employment benefits, subsequent pay awards agreed nationally, and new legislative requirements. We have a proposer in Councillor Dennis. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brown.
Happy to second, reserve my right to speak.
We now move on to the debate. I don't immediately see anybody wishing to speak, in which case we shall move on to the vote.
Yeah, that motion is carried.
Thank you very much. I close this meeting at 10:44. The next full council meeting is on Thursday, the 18th of April. And for those of you attending the North Harts Heroes Awards tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much. Good night.